Chapter 106, Things are getting interesting now. Chapter 106, Things are getting interesting now. Initially, a new record on the 10 formations stele wasn't something trial disciples of the 5 peaks would be concerned about. That was because everyone knew that it must have been broken by Zhongwen, and because of that, they were already used to it. However, when they heard that the new record was broken by an unknown, mysterious disciple, it piqued everyone's curiosity. Following that, news spread of how Zhongwen had returned to challenge the pagoda once more, but he still lost to the mysterious challenger. Right now, it was his third attempt and the outcome was unknown. A clash between two top geniuses of Array Peak was akin to the year-end Array Peak face-off being brought forward. It wasn't just the young and inquisitive trial disciples who were interested, even the 5 peak masters were aroused with slight curiosity. The number of people gathered before the 10 formations pagoda was increasing as time went on. Other than Array Peak, disciples of the other 4 peaks came as well to witness the final outcome. Led by Feng Haoyu, a group of talents from Spirit Peak arrived. Little Fatty was among them. After 3 months, Little Fatty was already at the peak of level 8 Qi condensation. Leng Rou's appearance caused a huge stir as many disciples turned their gazes towards this ice-cold beauty. In less than a year, she was regarded by quite a number of people as the top beauty of all 5 peaks. It wasn't just because of her looks, it was also because she was extremely strong. Right now, she was the same as Feng Haoyu at the peak of level 9 Qi condensation. She was his biggest competitor for the year-end Spirit Peaks face-off. More than that, Leng Rou had displayed a shocking talent in the craft of talismans. She also stood a high chance of taking the number 1 spot on Talisman Peak's year-end face-off. Disciples of Elixir, Talisman and Weapon Peak had arrived to watch the show with Shui Yi and the others among them. There were still 3 months left to the year-end face-off. This challenge of the 10 formations pagoda was probably the biggest event in all 5 peaks till then. In the blink of an eye, the 3rd day was already half gone. As dusk arrived, level 5 of the 10 formations pagoda lit up, indicating that Zhongwen was about to challenge level 6 once more. If he could clear level 6 within an hour, he would be able to reclaim his honor as the number 1 of Array Peak. Little Fatty squeezed through the crowd to get to Shui Yi and whispered, "Senior brother Shui, why haven't I seen bro at all recently? I've not seen him for a couple of days now as well. But I think things should be fine, don't worry," Shui Yi consoled. Little Fatty frowned and murmured, "Strange. I haven't seen him in 3 months and his cave abode was empty too. I was contemplating to help bro sharpen his fighting techniques." Shui Yi smiled without saying anything. In his opinion, Su Zimo might have realized he had no hope of winning at the end of the year and made an excuse to leave. That way, he could avoid the year-end face-off. Even though he might get mocked by others for it, it was better than losing in front of everyone. Right then, level 6 burst forth with a bright, bedazzling light of formation patterns. He did it. How long did it take? Around 45 minutes. It's less than an hour. As expected of senior brother Zhong. He is backed by a strong foundation of knowledge towards array formations after all. As the discussions went on, some of the Array Peak disciples who were closer to Zhongwen heaved a sigh of relief. Before long, Zhongwen was sent out of the 10 formations pagoda. At the same time, the top row of the 10 formations stele shone brightly as the words shuffled. Zhongwen, cleared level 6, 45 minutes. Not bad, not bad. Elder Luo nodded with a smile. Congratulations, senior brother Zhong. You're still the best. You've cleared level 6 with such speed. Some disciples of Array Peak hurriedly congratulated him with cupped fists. Hands behind his back, Feng Haoyu nodded to Zhongwen. Given Feng Haoyu's haughty character and status within the 5 peaks, he was already giving face to Zhongwen by showing that gesture. Zhongwen smiled and raised his voice. "Everyone, please quiet down." The noisy crowd gradually calmed down. "It's all thanks to your care and concern that I'm able to return to the top of the 10 formations stele. It's been a tiring few days, everyone, but Zhongwen changed the topic and with a sharp gaze, looked towards the 10 Formations Pagoda intently and declared, "The person I must thank the most is that unknown challenger. I've mentioned previously, his appearance will force the best out of M-." Before Zhongwen could even finish saying "me," his pitch changed and his pupils constricted as though he had witnessed something horrifying. Everyone looked in Zhongwen's direction. Level 7 of the 10 Formations Pagoda was lit up. The light was a little blinding. Before anyone knew it, Elder Luo was already standing up and looking at level 7 with a blank look of disbelief. The atmosphere in front of the 10 Formations Pagoda had turned extremely strange. No one spoke. Everyone was mesmerized by the light coming from level 7 that they forgot to breathe. It was as though they had lost their souls. Zhongwen's expression changed a couple of times before settling on an ashen look with a dim gaze. He had lost. He had lost completely. Right then, he tried countless times to muster his courage and gather his confidence, but he couldn't do it. The shining light of level 7 gave him a pressure that no one could understand. It was a pressure called despair. He knew better than any other disciples among the 5 peaks about the obscurity of Grade 2 formations. Even that mysterious challenger had spent an entire 2 days and nights before deducing his way to clear level 7. However, a clear was a clear. Yet, Zhongwen was completely lost in the face of level 7's formation. He was trapped by the illusion formation and could not locate any loopholes of it at all. In fact, he could not last for more than 4 hours within level 7. If he continued to stay on, there was a high chance he would suffer irrecoverable damage to his psyche. Ugh. Sighing sadly, Zhongwen turned around and mumbled to himself despondently, "I've got no chance of surpassing him." "You do." Right then, a warm voice rang out beside Zhongwen. Zhongwen looked up. Out of nowhere, Array Peak's master, Xian Yi, had appeared and was standing not far away, smiling and looking at him encouragingly. When he met with that gaze, Zhongwen shuddered and the haze within his heart dispersed, allowing him to see the light once more. Taking a deep breath of air, Zhongwen nodded his head and replied deeply, "Don't worry, master. I won't be defeated that easily. I'll be back once more." "Well done. That's more like my disciple." With his confidence regained, Zhongwen left the 10 Formations Pagoda once more. Xian Yi looked at the fading level 7 light and a trace of curiosity flashed in his eyes. He floated towards Elder Luo and set up a soundproof barrier with the wave of his hand, asking, "Who is inside? When did someone like that appear in our Array Peak?" "That lad is not from our peak," Elder Luo chuckled bitterly and shook his head. Xian Yi frowned and asked, "What's his name?" "Su Zimo." Xian Yi's heart skipped a beat and his expression turned odd. Sensing the change in Xian Yi's expression, Elder Luo asked, "Why? You know that person? His name does sound somewhat familiar, as though I've heard it somewhere." Xian Yi did not reply him. He seemed to have thought of something fun as he smiled. "Things are getting interesting now." Chapter 107, Gradual Emergence. Chapter 107, Gradual Emergence. Elder Luo was flustered as he urged, "Don't beat around the bush." "Who is he?" "The one that slashed at me on the front peak." "That's the lad," Xian Yi chuckled. "Him?" Elder Luo realized what was going on. However, he was even more puzzled and frowned. Hasn't he already issued a challenge to Feng Haoyu and caused a huge stir about wanting to prevent the latter from getting number 1 for Elixir and Weapon Peak? What has that got to do with us? If he can challenge the 10 Formations Pagoda, he must have put in quite a lot of effort on learning formations. Why do you think he's doing this instead of spending his time on refining elixirs, weapons and raising his cultivation? I've got no idea too, Xian Yi shook his head and smiled. But, don't you think that this is really interesting? So what if it is? He's not a seed from our peak, sigh, Elder Luo replied regrettably. Xian Yi looked at the 10 Formations Pagoda meaningfully and whispered, "I'm just curious now to see how many levels he can clear." Gradually, night arrived. Many array peak disciples left while disciples of the other 4 peaks waited to see who the challenger was. Little Fatty rolled his eyes and stopped an array peak disciple casually, asking with a grin, "Senior brother, why aren't you guys waiting anymore?" "Ha! Junior brother, this is where you lack experience." The person replied mysteriously, "Think about it. Even if you wait here the entire night, you might not get to see who the person is. You might as well come back tomorrow morning. Furthermore, even if that person can clear level 8, it'll take at least 2 days and nights too." Little Fatty nodded his head in agreement. "Senior brother, you're really smart. That does make sense." The mysterious person had taken 2 days and nights to clear level 7. Even if he could clear level 8, it wouldn't be that soon. At that thought, Little Fatty headed back to rest. There was no activity in the 10 Formations Pagoda for the next 2 days as more than half of the gathered disciples had lost their patience and left. Zhongwen arrived at the 10 Formations Pagoda on the morning of the 6th day, ready to challenge it once more. Before night arrived, he was sent out by the pagoda. Even though he had cleared the first 6 levels even faster than before, he still failed at level 7. Just as he was about to leave, level 8 lit up. Level 8. That person has cleared level 8. That's a full 3 days and nights. That means that he's been inside for a whole 6 days now. What sort of a body does he have to withstand such a draining experience? In fact, many disciples did not know that Su Zimo's physique was much more terrifying than they had thought. Moreover, he was tortured by Little Crane endlessly back in his Weapon Peak cave abode, and it was almost 10 days of sleepless nights back then. It could be said that Su Zimo's current achievements in array formation was forced entirely by a stupid bird. When he saw the glowing light of level 8, Zhongwen felt a bitterness surge within him. He no longer had any hope. The difference was too great. Once again, he looked at that familiar name at the top of the 10 Formations stele. He found it a little eye-piercing and could not help but laugh at himself bitterly before leaving. When he saw Zhongwen's back view, Elder Luo shook his head and sighed. What a pity. If that person had not appeared, Zhongwen would have been a really great genius of array formations. By now, the disciples of the various peaks had a rough grasp of the timing for the 10 Formations Pagoda. Based on that logic, the mysterious person was going to take even longer to clear level 9. With the year-end face-off approaching, most disciples would naturally not choose to spend their days wasted here. Moreover, it was already dark and everyone dispersed to rest in their cave abodes. Before long, it was peaceful at the 10 Formations Pagoda once more. Elder Luo was the only one still guarding as he stood up and stretched. Xian Yi walked over from afar and said, "Elder Luo, go and rest first. I don't think there'll be much activity for the next few days now that the lad's at level 9. Elder Luo shook his head. "Why? You're still worried?" Xian Yi chuckled. "If you are, I'll help you watch over tonight." Elder Luo let out a mysterious smile and asked, "Do you know what type of formation is at level 9? Killing?" Xian Yi was puzzled as to why Elder Luo would raise that question. Elder Luo asked once more, "Do you know how long that Su Zimo took to get through level 4's killing formation?" Realizing that there was something more to it, Xian Yi's eyes gleamed as he made a guess. 15 minutes? Elder Luo snickered, beating around the bush slightly before replying slowly, 17 seconds. Pust. Xian Yi's expression changed entirely as he gasped, "How could that be?" After a deep silence, Xian Yi asked in a testing manner, "Is it a coincidence?" Gazing at the 10 Formations Pagoda, Elder Luo remarked softly, "We'll know soon if that's the case." All of a sudden. The moment Elder Luo said that, level 9 lit up the night skies. Xian Yi and Elder Luo exchanged glances, both could tell of the other's shock. How long did he take this time round? Around 47 seconds. Seems like that lad really does have a method to get through killing formations. Level 10 comprises a combination array formation of 2 types. If one of them is a killing formation, the combination formation would be extremely easy for that lad. If he manages to clear level 10. Su Zimo, who had just entered level 10, did not know that he would cause such a huge commotion among the 5 peaks with his challenge of the pagoda. He had reaped a lot from this challenge. Even though he had spent a lot of time studying in the array chamber, that was all just theory without any practical aspect. However, Su Zimo had witnessed and learned from the various methods and techniques deployed by different array formation masters in setting up the formations in the 10 formations pagoda. Observing carefully in level 10, Su Zimo smiled. It was a combination formation comprising of a killing and trap formation. A killing formation was almost non-existent for him, and the only thing he had to dispel was the trap formation. Seems like my luck's better this time round. A deep fatigue could be seen from Su Zimo, but still, his eyes remained clear and resolute. For 6 whole days, Su Zimo had not rested at all as he spent his time dispelling formations. Even though it didn't expend much spirit chi, he was physically and mentally exhausted. It was a huge toll on one's mental state to dispel formations. However, fully motivated by the thought of not having to worry about that stupid bird after getting out of this place, Su Zimo picked himself up and worked at dispelling the formation. On around midnight of the 8th day, the moon was bright with little stars in the skies. Other than Elder Luo, there was no one else in front of the 10 formations pagoda. Just as Elder Luo was about to fall asleep, the peak of the 10 formations pagoda lit up without any warning. Astonished, Elder Luo looked at those shining formation patterns for the longest time in silence. According to the time that Su Zimo cleared level 10, it was now short of 6 hours to make a full 8 days since he had entered the 10 formations pagoda. A challenge of this duration was not merely a test of a cultivator's ability to set up and dispel formations, it was also a test of their determination, physique, mental state, etc. Elder Luo was very pleased. It was as though he was looking at the gradual emergence of a monster in array formations from this pagoda that he was guarding in a corner of Tianhuang mainland. Chapter 108, Sword Formation. Chapter 108, Sword Formation. Level 10 of the 10 Formations Pagoda. When Su Zimo dispelled the formation, he saw a man clad in white robes. Hands behind his back, the man's black hair was casually draped over his shoulders and swayed gently against the breeze. Standing at the exit on the top of the pagoda, the man was back facing Su Zimo, looking as though he was part of the night skies. Even though Su Zimo could not see the person's face, he caught sight of a hexagonal, obscure emblem on the person's sleeve. It was Array Peak's master, Xian Yi. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. Was this an illusion formation? Could level 10 be made up of 3 instead of 2 different formations? There was an illusion formation left after he dispelled the killing and trap formation. This is not an illusion. You've already cleared the 10 formations pagoda successfully. Xian Yi's voice suddenly rang, gentle and calm, as though he could read Su Zimo's thoughts. Certain powerful array formation masters were experts of games and could deduce the other party's thoughts with just some clues. Su Zimo did not get careless despite hearing Xian Yi's reply. After all, similar circumstances could happen within an illusion formation as well. It was hard to differentiate between reality. Standing on the spot, Su Zimo observed for a long time. When he sensed no aura of formation patterns, he advanced and cupped his fists. Greetings, Peak Master. Xian Yi did not turn around, merely asking, how long have you been studying formations? 3 months, Su Zimo did not hide anything. A shocked expression flashed through Xian Yi's eyes and disappeared quickly. 3 months. Xian Yi mumbled repeatedly to himself. After a long time, he turned slightly and smiled at Su Zimo, nodding. Come on, stand beside me. Momentarily startled, Su Zimo continued walking forth until he was beside Xian Yi. Tired? Xian Yi asked with a smile. Su Zimo nodded his head. Right then, the only thing he wanted was to head back to his cave abode and sleep in silence without a care for the world. I've heard about your challenge with Feng Haoyu as well. Why did you suddenly come and learn about formations despite not having much time? Xian Yi was curious. The image of that stupid bird flashed through Su Zimo's mind as he shook his head with a bitter chuckle. There's a long story behind it. It's less than 3 months until the year-end face-off. I'm not concerned about elixir and weapon refinement, but I heard that you challenged Feng Haoyu to a fight after the Spirit Peak face-off. Xian Yi asked. Yes. Are you confident? Hesitating for a moment, Su Zimo shook his head. No. He would be confident if not for his concern that his demonic self might be exposed. However, in terms of pure cultivation techniques, Su Zimo was far inferior. Xian Yi replied deeply, actually, the killing methods of qi refinement warriors are rather simple because the spirit qi in their dantian is limited. Even at perfected qi condensation where their dantian opened up like a vast sea, it will still be in spirit qi state. One can only deploy stronger spirit arts when they advance to become a foundation establishment cultivator and their spirit qi's quality condenses into liquid form. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he recalled when he was being pursued by Joyful Sect. Some of the foundation establishment cultivators deployed strange techniques like the ground caving and vine wood twining skills which caused him great trouble. Those must be the spirit arts that Xian Yi was referring to. Between qi refinement warriors, the only thing that they compare is one's mastery of sword wielding. Xian Yi continued, in terms of sword wielding, one of our sect's 3 major secret skills, Ethereal Sword, is famous through the northern region of Tianhuang and is ranked at the top. Feng Haoyu is already cultivating it. Su Zimo could tell what Xian Yi was implying. In other words, he had no chance of winning against Feng Haoyu who was already cultivating Ethereal Sword. In the hazy, starry night, both men stood at the peak of the 10 Formations Pagoda. One was clad in white and had a graceful bearing while the other was clad in green with a delicate, handsome face. If any trial disciples of the 5 peaks saw this scene, their jaws would drop in shock. Every single peak master was a golden core. What sort of status did they bear in the sect? The fact that a mere trial disciple at only level 6 qi condensation was able to stand shoulder to shoulder and chat with a Ray Peak's master was a treatment that would make anyone envious. Noticing Su Zimo's silence, Xian Yi spoke once more. Initially, I had not meant to say these things to you. However, since you've already cleared the 10 Formations Pagoda, I can offer you a way out. Whether or not you succeed depends on yourself. Thank you, Peak Master. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he bowed hurriedly to express his thanks. Xian Yi continued slowly, other than the standard skills and secret techniques of sword wielding, there is another method that can raise a cultivator's fighting strength. It's called a sword formation. Sword formation? Su Zimo furrowed his brows in deep thought. In a ray chamber, he had chanced across a bamboo scroll named Tripartite Sword Formation. Xian Yi replied, most array formation masters are weak because in fights, opponents would not give you a lot of time to set up your formation before rushing in blindly. However, there exists a special branch amongst array formation masters, the sword formation master. The prerequisite of becoming a sword formation master is that they must first be an array formation master with a deep understanding towards formations. Secondly, they had to cultivate a type of sword formation. Su Zimo nodded. Sword formation manuals are extremely rare and even within our sect, we only have 2. One is called the Tripartite Sword Formation while the other is the Hexagonal Sword Formation. The former is a Grade 1 formation while the latter is a Grade 2. The activation of a sword formation is through remnant marks created by tearing through the void with a flying sword. By using them as replacement for formation patterns, an array formation master is able to create a formation that can produce a powerful force. Su Zimo was shocked to hear this. Just setting up of formation patterns was something that was extremely difficult for array formation masters. Any single mistake and the formations would fail. Furthermore, they were now talking about using the remnant marks in the void as a replacement for formation patterns. Xian Yi spoke. The reason why there are so little sword formation masters is because the conditions are way too harsh. Every single sword formation master is an elite among the array formation masters and have a far superior understanding of formations. Furthermore, sword formations usually require the use of multiple flying swords. Using a single flying sword in battle is tough enough, let alone using many for a sword formation. Su Zimo nodded. For example, 3 flying swords were required for the tripartite sword formation. As the name implied, hexagonal sword formation would most likely require 6 flying swords. Also, controlling multiple flying swords would cause one spirit chi to deplete faster. If the formation was a failure, it would be a waste of spirit chi for the sword formation master and he would end up placing himself in danger. Xian Yi chuckled. Furthermore, how are normal array formation masters going to get that many flying swords? For example, many of our trial disciples barely have a single inferior grade flying sword, let alone 3, 6, or even more. Can they use flying swords of different grades as replacement? Su Zimo asked. No. Xian Yi shook his head. You have to understand that the flying swords used for a sword formation must be of the same grade. If the grades were different, the formation patterns left in the void would deviate and the formation would definitely fail. Chapter 109, Earth-shattering. Chapter 109, Earth-shattering. Of course, if the flying swords used are of the same build, size, weight and sharpness etc., it would be even easier to set up a formation. Pausing for a moment, Xian Yi chuckled. But that's not too realistic unless the flying swords are created by the same weapon refinement master who had specially created them as a set. A set of flying swords? Su Zimo's eyes twinkled meaningfully. You're a disciple of Weapon Peak. Even though you have yet to become a weapon refinement master, I'm sure you understand how difficult it is to refine weapons. It's already difficult enough to create a single graded spirit weapon, let alone a set. The mention of that had Su Zimo's heart skipping a beat. Everything else aside, it wasn't really difficult for him to create a set of almost identical inferior grade flying swords. But of course, I know that this is not an easy path to undertake and this idea might not even be of help for you to defeat Feng Haoyu. After all, with just 3 months left to the year-end face-off, time is limited for you. Xian Yi continued expectantly, however, you're the most talented array formation master that I've ever seen. Perhaps, you can one day be a true sword formation master if you continue in this direction. Peak Master, are you a sword formation master? Su Zimo suddenly asked. I'm the only sword formation master in our sect, Xian Yi nodded his head with a smile. It was only then that Su Zimo understood why Xian Yi was waiting for him and telling him about those things. The latter wanted to find a sword formation master successor in the sect. Pulling out a scroll from his storage bag, Xian Yi passed it over to Su Zimo. I believe you must have come across the tripartite sword formation in the array chamber. This is the hexagonal sword formation. Burn it after you memorize it, do not spread it. Su Zimo received it with both hands and nodded his head. Xian Yi pondered for a moment and continued, Zimo, don't harp on a moment's failure. There is still a long way to go. Su Zimo knew that Xian Yi was worried he would lose to Feng Haoyu and have his confidence dashed, hence that advice. In truth, Xian Yi was not the only one. Neither of the 4 peak masters nor anyone in the sect had their eyes on Su Zimo winning. Perhaps he might be evenly matched with Feng Haoyu in terms of elixir and weapon refinement. However, in everyone's eyes, the outcome was already decided. If the both of them fought, Su Zimo would only humiliate himself. Of course, there was a single existence in Ethereal Peak who thought highly of Su Zimo. Only, that existence wasn't human. Go on, time is precious. Spend more effort on elixir and weapon refinement so that you can get number 1 for those 2 peaks, Xian Yi instructed. Su Zimo nodded his head and closed the hexagonal sword formations manual. Summoning his flying sword, he left the 10 formations pagoda and disappeared into the night skies. The moment Su Zimo left the 10 formations pagoda, the names on the 10 formations stele started shifting as everything was pushed down for a blank space above. Zhong Wen's previous record was now pushed to the second row. A line of words appeared on the first row of the 10 formations stele. Cleared level 10, 7 days 18 hours. However, the portion where his name was supposed to be was a complete blank. Right then, Xian Yi descended from the 10 Formations pagoda and accidentally caught sight of what happened. Slightly surprised, he murmured softly, "That lad must be so tired that he forgot to place his sect badge on the 10 Formations stele." Stunned for a moment, Elder Luo suddenly realized. I forgot to tell him about this. The 10 Formations stele would only record one's name after they tapped their sect badge on it after the pagoda challenge. For the past 3 months, Su Zimo spent his time buried in the ancient texts in Array Chamber with absolute focus. He did not interact with any Array Peak disciples as well. In fact, he did not even know about the function of the 10 Formations stele. When he saw the huge stele before his challenge, he did not think much nor ask about it and headed for the pagoda straight. Elder Luo thought that as a disciple of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo was merely there to join the crowd and did not mention it since he had not expected the latter to leave a mark on the stele either. Should I call him back? Elder Luo leapt into the air, prepared to chase after Su Zimo to inform him about it. Xian Yi waved it off and shook his head. Forget it. That lad hasn't slept a single week in nearly 8 days. Let him have a good rest. Should I look for him tomorrow then? Elder Luo asked. Xian Yi remained silent for a moment. Perhaps after the 5 peaks face-off. Let's hide this for him for the time being. Needless to say, something like this would definitely cause a commotion among the 5 peaks and it'll attract trouble for him if the other disciples knew that he was the one who cleared the 10 Formations pagoda. Yes, that's good too. Elder Luo nodded his head. It's less than 3 months to the end of the year. Let's not affect his cultivation because of this. The both of them chatted casually for a little more before leaving the place. Elder Luo could finally rest in peace as well. Once again, the 10 Formations pagoda returned to normalcy. Disciples of the 5 peaks were fast asleep at the moment as no one realized that overnight, a new line had appeared on the 10 Formations stele. Yu Ping was a disciple of Array Peak. His habit for the past few days would involve running to the 10 Formations stele for a look in the morning before going off to do his own things. This morning, Yu Ping arrived on his flying sword and took a spin around 10 Formations pagoda, glancing at 10 Formations stele casually. Yeah, no changes. He murmured softly. There were a total of 100 lines on the 10 Formations stele and there were truly not many changes with a single glance. All of a sudden, Yu Ping's expression changed starkly as he turned around, glaring at the first row intently. His eyes widened as his pupils constricted. Something changed. There was a change on the 10 Formations stele. Senior Brother Zhong was pushed to the second row. The name of the first row was What was the meaning of this? Blank? Yu Ping was dazed. Blinking his eyes, he looked again, it was truly a blank. Landing on the ground, he approached even closer and rubbed his eyes. However, it was still blank. The challenger had no name? Instinctively, Yu Ping continued reading the row of words as his jaws dropped apart while his eyes flooded with shock. Cleared level 10, 7 days 18 hours. That line of words had him rattled silly. Yu Ping stood there motionlessly, absolutely stunned as his mind went into chaos. The only thing he did was mumble subconsciously, cleared level 10, cleared level 10. Junior Brother you're so early today? Someone greeted him from the back to be met with his silence. What are you doing standing here and getting immersed in the 10 Formations stele? A disciple of Array Peak who came after Yu Ping patted him on the shoulder and commented casually before raising his head. Instantly, that person's smile froze as well. After a long time, a shrill shriek tore through the skies, waking countless of Array Peak disciples who were still deep in their sleep. Cleared. Cleared. The mysterious challenger cleared level 10. A new record is born. Zhongwen has lost completely. Within an hour, the news spread through all 5 peaks. It was earth-shattering. Chapter 110, Just Who Was It? Chapter 110, Just Who Was It? This day, the 5 peaks quaked as countless of trial disciples rushed towards Array Peak. Not just that, more than half of Ethereal Peak's inner sect disciples rushed over because of the news as well. Logically speaking, the birth of a new record on the 10 formations stele shouldn't have created such a stir. However, it was said that the record was downright broken. There were only 10 levels to the 10 formations pagoda and the challenger had cleared them all. Before long, many sect disciples gathered before the 10 formations pagoda and in the skies, many were still continuously streaming in on their flying swords. Spirit Peak's Feng Haoyu, Leng Ro, and Little Fatty were among them. Shui Yi and the others from Weapon Peak came over too. Zhongwen looked at the first row on the 10 formations stele with a deep sorrow in his eyes. Had he known that this would be the case, he need not have tried repeatedly to challenge the pagoda previously just to beat this person. The both of them were not even on the same level of understanding towards formations. One can be called an intermediate array formation master after clearing level 10 of the 10 formations pagoda. Becoming an intermediate array formation master at the Qi condensation realm is way too terrifying. Not only is this record unprecedented, no one should be able to surpass it in the future. This guy spent close to 8 days without eating or sleeping. How did he manage to survive? The fact that the challenger did not leave his name piqued everyone's curiosity as countless guesses were made. Just who is that person? There must be a reason why the mysterious challenger did not leave his name. No matter how hard everyone tried, they would not be able to guess. The reason was because Su Zimo did not know the purpose of the 10 formation stele and neither did he know how to leave his name on it. Could it be Senior Brother Lu? Other than Senior Brother Zhong, he's the only one with the deepest understanding of formations. I saw Senior Brother Lu a couple of days back. It can't be him. Or could it be Senior Brother Tseng? He hasn't appeared for the past few days. There's a chance it's him. I heard that Senior Brother Tseng left to do a sect mission. Everyone continued discussing fervently with wild guesses. I think this Senior Brother must be the true genius hiding within our Array Peak. Definitely someone handsome and extraordinary. Most importantly, he is someone indifferent to fame and isn't cocky. A female disciple of Array Peak muttered to herself, immersed in her fantasy as her eyes swooned with love. I think that he probably wants to reveal his identity at the year-end face-off and shock everyone, another disciple deduced. All the gathered disciples looked on with awe. Clearing level 10 meant that one could set up a grade 2 formation. In Elixir and Talisman Peak, the geniuses were barely able to refine grade 1 elixirs or talismans. In Weapon Peak, no one could even create an inferior grade spirit weapon. From that perspective, that mysterious challenger had already surpassed all the trial disciples in the 5 peaks. Within the crowd, Feng Haoyu suddenly chuckled and shook his head. The Tao of formations is merely a supplementary skill at the end of the day. In the cultivation world, one's true strength is what matters in life and death situations. With that statement, Feng Haoyu turned around to leave with a bunch of Spirit Peak disciples behind him. What's he getting cocky for? He thinks he's a somebody just because he's good at fighting? Isn't that right? If this mysterious senior brother were to set up an array formation for him, he'd have to obediently surrender. Listen to how salty he sounds. That's the number 1 of Spirit Peak. How crass. Instantly, many Array Peak disciples were displeased as they mocked behind Feng Haoyu's back. To them, Feng Haoyu's disdain of that mysterious challenger was equivalent to his disdain of Array Peak and indirectly, them. Furthermore, even though the Tao of formations was a supplementary skill, it was extremely important. If a sect was weak but possessed an extremely strong array formation master, he could set up a sect-protecting formation to withstand powerful enemies. That was why some sects in the cultivation world who had strong array formation masters were almost impenetrable. Amazing. That's amazing. Little Fatty rubbed his chubby palms and declared, it'd be such a pity if I don't get to know someone so amazing. Just who is this person? Leng Ro's gaze lingered for a long time on the 10 formations stele before she nodded her head. Impressive. With that, Leng Ro left Array Peak too. When the many disciples beside Leng Ro heard that, they could not help but yelp. She had a cold and aloof nature and barely spoke. Even a genius like Feng Haoyu had not received an appraisal as such from her. However, that single word she said was enough to tell of her thoughts. Little Fatty squinted his eyes and looked around the crowd for a long time as though he was searching for someone. After a while, he found nothing and frowned, murmuring to himself, "Where did bro disappear to recently? He isn't even here to take a look at such a huge commotion? No, I've got to go take a look at Weapon Peak." His mind made up, Little Fatty summoned his flying sword and sped towards Weapon Peak. In the distant skies, 5 golden cores stood among the clouds, watching the rare spectacle on Array Peak. They were the 5 peak masters. Just who is the person who challenged the pagoda? Even I'm curious, the brown-haired youth of Elixir Peak said with a gaudy tone. 4 pairs of eyes landed on Xian Yi as when Xian chuckled. "Say it. I don't believe that you don't know who it is as Array Peak's master." Hands behind his back, Xian Yi smiled in silence. "Stop beating around the bush. Say it." Talisman Peak's master, a cold-looking woman, barked. Xian Yi's smile froze on his face. "Haha." The disheveled old man rubbed his hands in laughter. "You wouldn't want Qi Shan to get angry. If she throws a bunch of talismans on your face, you'll know what's true suffering." "No, no." The brown-haired youth shook his head with a serious expression. "Qi Shan won't bear to attack Xian Yi." Qi Shan's face blushed for a brief moment as she glared at the disheveled old man and brown-haired youth with grit teeth. "You damned fogies. Nothing good comes out of your mouths." With an awkward expression, Xian Yi looked at Qi Shan warily before coughing. "I really can't reveal this." When Xian was puzzled. "That's strange. How unique is the identity of this lad that you can't tell us?" Xian Yi shook his head in silence. The disheveled old man waved it off. "Forget it, let's not make things difficult for him." Pausing for a moment, the disheveled old man couldn't help but remark, "But, you're quite something, Xian Yi. To think that you've managed to groom such a talent without letting us know about it. That's quite skillful of you." "Humph, I reckon he must have spent quite a bit of time and energy on that lad," Qi Shan scoffed. Xian Yi smiled. "Not really. He's self-taught." "Self-taught?" The 4 peak masters exchanged surprised glances. If someone could clear the 10 formations pagoda based on his own studies without the guidance of a strong array formation master as backing, that was truly something incredible. "Damn, that's going to make us even more curious," Wen Xian laughed bitterly. Xian Yi pondered for a moment and replied, "Don't worry. His identity won't be hidden for long. It's just a matter of time before you guys know about it." Chapter 111, Displeasure of Little Fatty. Chapter 111, Displeasure of Little Fatty. Weapon Peak. Little Fatty arrived at the entrance of Su Zimo's cave abode. The door of the entrance was destroyed by Little Crane and Su Zimo had not fixed it. Looking inside, Little Fatty caught sight of a green-robed man in deep sleep on the stone bed with a ferocious spirit tiger guarding at the side. A twinkle appeared in Little Fatty's eyes as he cast his flying sword aside and rushed in. When the spirit tiger saw Little Fatty, it growled softly but did not show any animosity. It naturally knew that Little Fatty was Su Zimo's friend. If anyone else had barged in as such, the spirit tiger would have rushed in front of Su Zimo to block. Bro. Wake up." Little Fatty was already yelling before he approached. Even though Su Zimo was deep in sleep, he was already awake subconsciously the moment Little Fatty had barged in. Shaking his drowsy head, Su Zimo sat up and blinked his sleepy eyes while stretching his tendons. "Bro, where have you been for the past 3 months? Why haven't I seen you anywhere?" Little Fatty asked. Su Zimo replied casually, "I went out to relax." Rolling his eyes, Little Fatty grumbled, "Bro, you sure are confident. The 5 Peaks face-off is approaching and yet you went out to relax." Pausing for a moment, little fatty inched toward Su Zimo and said mysteriously, "Bro, haven't you heard that something major happened in our sect recently?" Su Zimo was somewhat puzzled as he shook his head. "I don't know. Bro, you know that there's a 10 formations pagoda in Array Peak, right?" "Yeah." A mysterious disciple cleared the entire 10 formations pagoda. Su Zimo's heart skipped a bit and he was more awake now. Frowning, he asked, "How did you know about it?" "I'm not the only one. All trial disciples of the 5 peaks know about it. Before long, the entire sect's going to know about it. There's a lot of people gathered on Array Peak right now." Su Zimo was shocked. He had not expected that his unintentional actions would have caused such a stir. Could Elder Luo and Peak Master Xian Yi have spread the news? Wrong. On second thought, Su Zimo asked, "What do you mean by mysterious disciple? Nobody knows who cleared the 10 formations pagoda?" Hee. Little fatty gave a mysterious smile as he said beamingly, "That's the most incredible part. After the disciple cleared the pagoda, he did not leave his name on the 10 formations stele. Now, disciples of all 5 peaks are guessing at that person's identity." 10 formations stele? Su Zimo blinked his eyes and vaguely recalled that there was a huge stele filled with words beside the 10 formations pagoda. "What do you mean leaving a name on the 10 formations stele?" Su Zimo asked once more. Little fatty explained the use of the 10 formations stele. After clearing the pagoda, one has to tap their sect badge on the 10 formations stele for their name to be recorded. Su Zimo froze for a moment and muttered to himself, "So, there's such a thing. That incredible person cleared all 10 levels in one go and left gracefully just like that. How admirable." Little fatty's eyes were filled with awe as though he was imagining a cultivator's extraordinary demeanor amidst the ethereal clouds, leaving as he flicked his sleeves. In reality, Su Zimo was thoroughly exhausted that night and had barely managed to return on his flying sword. There was no way he was that carefree. Little fatty noticed that Su Zimo was distracted and seemingly disinterested. He then reached for Su Zimo's arm, saying, "Bro, let's go. I'll take you to Array Peak and you'll see just how amazing that person is." Discreetly, Su Zimo avoided little fatty's hand and shook his head. "I'll give it a pass." Su Zimo did not have much time to begin with. Now that he had spent 3 months on Array Peak without refining elixirs, raising his cultivation or practicing sword wielding, he was left with less than 3 months to the end of the year. How would he have the mood to join the crowd? Furthermore, he was that mysterious challenger. Su Zimo wasn't curious in the slightest bit. At the same time, Su Zimo realized that if word were to spread out, it would bring quite a bit of trouble for him. He decided to hide it for the time being. "Bro, it's a huge crowd on Array Peak right now. It's absolutely unprecedented. It'd be such a pity if you didn't go take a look." Little fatty did not give up and continued persuading. Su Zimo chuckled and replied casually, "I know nothing about formations too. What's the big deal about challenging the pagoda?" That statement was casually thrown out by Su Zimo. However, little fatty was instantly displeased. Bang! His chubby palm slammed down heavily on Su Zimo's stone bed, giving off a dull thud. Su Zimo was dazed. "Bro, that's not a nice thing to say." Little fatty kept his smile and his expression was unprecedentedly serious. "Perhaps that mysterious disciple might not be your match in terms of weapon refinement. But bro, you should not underestimate him like that. What do you mean, what's the big deal about challenging the pagoda? Do you know what it implies for someone to be able to clear level 10 of the 10 formations pagoda?" Su Zimo asked automatically, "What?" Little fatty was stunned at Su Zimo's question. After holding it for a long time, his face flushed and he could not give a reply either. Naturally, little fatty was not really angry. It was just a moment of indignance for that mysterious challenger. Su Zimo looked at little fatty's embarrassed face and could not help but smile. "Actually, I'm that mysterious disciple." "Bro, stop messing around," little fatty waved his hand to interrupt him. Su Zimo. Little Fatty said in a deep voice, "Bro, you have to understand that through the generations of trial disciples in the history of the sect, there have been many geniuses. However, the best among them have only cleared level 6. Look at that Feng Haoyu. He may seem impressive now, but it's not like there hasn't been another genius with a wind spirit root in the sect. He's just one of them. However, this mysterious disciple that cleared level 10? He's the first person through the thousands of years of history of our sect." Su Zimo could only nod his head in agreement. "Think about it, bro, wasn't it incredible when you got through the 8 distresses formation and destroyed the spirit testing gate? Just like you, the accomplishment of this mystery disciple is unprecedented." With a stoic face, Little Fatty said earnestly, "Bro, you've got to be humble. Humility is important. You can't look down on others casually. That won't do." "Alright, I got it. I'll check it out when I've got time." Su Zimo was sweating profusely for this conversation. When he saw that Little Fatty had no intention of stopping, he changed the topic. "It's been a long time since I've cultivated. I've got to seize the opportunity to raise my cultivation." Little Fatty scanned Su Zimo with the spirit-peering art. He was still at level 6 chi condensation. Bitterly, Little Fatty said, "Bro, look at you. You were already at level 6 chi condensation 3 months ago, but you haven't progressed at all. How are you going to fight Feng Haoyu? Bro, even if you know you can't win him, you've got to pick yourself up and not give up. The path of cultivation is like going against the waters. If you don't advance, you get pushed back. You've wasted 3 months just like that. What should I say about you? Sigh. Su Zimo." Chapter 112, Elixir Choice. Chapter 112, Elixir Choice. With a great deal of effort, Su Zimo finally managed to send Little Fatty away. He then squatted at the entrance of his cave abode and focused on setting up a formation. He set up a grade 2 formation, Smoke Gathering Formation. Because the stupid bird's identity was unique, Su Zimo did not dare to set up a killing formation. It would suffice for him to set up a trap formation and restrain the stupid bird. Standing at the side, the spirit tiger watched. Even though it did not understand what was going on, it realized that Su Zimo's return must mean that the latter had found a way to suppress that stupid bird. He was gone for a full 3 months. It wasn't a short period of time. Su Zimo took an entire day to set up the smoke gathering formation. However, he had no intention of stopping right after. He continued to set up another soundproof formation outside the smoke gathering formation. That way, Su Zimo wouldn't be affected no matter how the stupid bird cried within the trap. Thereafter, he made an imprint using the Spirit Beast badge on the Spirit Tiger's neck so that the latter would have unrestricted access to the cave abode. By the time everything was set up, it was night. Su Zimo looked at the night skies without feeling sleepy in the slightest bit. It was less than 3 months to the year-end face-off. He did not have much time left. According to his original plan, he would have been able to reach perfected chi condensation through sufficient use of spirit stones. Now that he had spent so much time on Array Peak, he would only be able to reach level 9 chi condensation at max come the end of the year. After all, he did not have much progress on elixir refinement yet. Against Feng Haoyu's perfected chi condensation, Su Zimo knew that he had no chance of winning. Furthermore, Feng Haoyu was cultivating one of the 3 major secret skills, Ethereal Sword. Su Zimo's only chance of winning was on the 2 sword formation manuals. He had to master the tripartite and hexagonal sword formation before the year-end face-off and become a sword formation master. Su Zimo did not sleep the entire night as he summoned his elixir furnace and started with refinement. Previously, he had a chance of refining grade 1 elixirs. However, it exploded due to Little Crane's interference, wasting all his previous efforts. After 3 months of not refining elixirs, Su Zimo's technique was clearly rusty. Unable to control the temperature of the flames precisely, the spirit herbs were burnt to ashes. It was only till midnight when he finally found the feeling and got into the groove. Failing many times in between, Su Zimo finally managed to refine a cauldron of elixirs come early morning. Usually, a cauldron would contain 9 elixirs. However, the complexity of the refinement increased with the recipe and as such, the number of elixirs were reduced. For example, among grade 1 elixirs, the most difficult of them was the Foundation Establishment elixir, and each refinement would only produce a single elixir, nothing more. Spirit Gathering elixir was the most simple to refine amongst grade 1 elixirs. 9 Spirit Gathering elixirs burst forth from the holes in the elixir furnace and hovered in midair. 8 of the elixirs had 3 elixir patterns etched on them, those were superior grade elixirs. One of them had 4 elixir patterns, a supreme grade elixir. Looking at the 9 elixirs that he had refined floating in the air, Su Zimo's eyes flickered as he pondered. It was out of his expectations that he had managed to produce elixirs of such quality with his first attempt. Refinement of elixirs was unlike that of weapons. For weapon refinement, fire was the foundation. However, the true core of it was on the steps of tempering and spirit gathering. As for elixir refinement, the true core lies in the 2 extraction steps. The more thorough the extraction, the less the impurities of the elixir and the better the quality of the end product. With a single thought, a scarlet flame appeared from the fingertip of Su Zimo's right hand with a loud thud. There was only a single explanation as to why he could create elixirs of such quality. It was the level 3 spirit fire. He could vaguely sense that the level 3 spirit fire produced by his right hand was unlike normal level 3 spirit fires. In fact, it seemed to give him a unique advantage in terms of refining spirit herbs. As long as he continued practicing on grasping the flame's temperature precisely and familiarizing himself with the ratio of spirit herbs, it wouldn't be impossible for him to create perfect elixirs. Perhaps this flame of mine isn't actually a level 3 spirit fire? Maybe it just shares the same color as one? Su Zimo looked at his right hand repeatedly and fell into deep thought. Right then, a familiar cry of a crane appeared outside his cave abode. Caw, caw. The spirit tiger trembled as it jolted up in fright. The hair on its back all stood up as fear seeped out of its eyes. Even after 3 months, the spirit tiger still had lingering fears. That was enough to tell how tormented it was by Little Crane. It's finally here. Su Zimo smiled gently as he looked calmly at Little Crane descending from the skies. Flapping its wings, Little Crane looked at Su Zimo with a taunting and gleeful expression. Its meaning was clear: small fry, even if you hide outside for 3 months, you'll have to come back sooner or later. You can't escape from my grasp. Right as Little Crane descended upon the entrance of the cave abode, a bright, bedazzling light shone from the ground. The formation pattern shone brightly as the smoke-gathering formation was activated. Caw! Little Crane's expression changed as it panicked. It wanted to soar into the skies, but it realized that no matter how it tried, it could not fly out of that small region. It was trapped. Having grown up in Ethereal Peak, Little Crane naturally knew of the methods deployed by cultivators. Instantly, it realized that it might have fallen into a type of array formation. Caw, caw. Enraged, Little Crane shrieked sharply and loudly. However, its voice reverberated around the soundproof formation and could not pass through. Inside the cave abode, the spirit tiger looked at Little Crane opening its mouth without any sound coming out. Instantly, it beamed and jumped around the spot in excitement. It was his turn to see the stupid bird suffer. Finally, comeuppance. It's my turn for revenge. The spirit tiger reared its head and howled, letting out all its indignance. When it saw the spirit tiger's provocation, Little Crane was even more enraged. It stood silent on the spot for some time before suddenly flapping its wings. Amidst the raging hurricane formed, it swooped towards the cave abode with cold, sharp talons. The spirit tiger jumped in right. Just as it was about to dodge, it realized that Little Crane was still stuck within the same region and could not escape at all. It merely slammed around the corners like a headless bug. That caused the spirit tiger to laugh even more merrily. Su Zimo heaved out a sigh of relief. It was obvious that the stupid bird knew nothing about formations. Furthermore, it was not strong enough to break through the formation with brute force. He could finally cultivate in peace for the next few days. Totally indifferent towards Little Crane, who was rampaging and crying at the entrance of the cave abode, Su Zimo took out a spirit stone from his storage bag and channeled chi condensation to cultivate. His cultivation was stagnant for 3 months now, and he had to raise it as soon as possible. Even though he had just refined a cauldron of spirit-gathering elixirs, Su Zimo had no intention of consuming them. He found out from Elixir Peak's master previously that other than perfect elixirs, all other graded elixirs had impurities. The impact they had on cultivators was something that was undetermined. At that time, Su Zimo had already made a choice. Unless it was a perfect elixir, he was not going to consume it casually. At that moment, Su Zimo did not realize it yet. However, that choice of his was precisely the reason why he would gain a solid foundation that no one could match in his path of cultivation. Chapter 113, How Sinful. Chapter 113, How Sinful. After 3 days, Su Zimo finally refined a cauldron of spirit-gathering elixirs with a perfect elixir. He placed that perfect elixir carefully into a jade bottle and kept it in his storage bag. Little Crane was trapped by the smoke-gathering formation for the past 3 days and was unable to escape. It was also hoarse after crying for 3 days and nights. By now, it was sprawled on the ground in a despondent manner, looking at Su Zimo pitifully. Su Zimo came before the smoke-gathering formation and looked at Little Crane with a fake smile. "Stupid bird, you know how strong I am now?" Little Crane nodded hurriedly and let out a look of awe. Su Zimo was unmoved. This stupid bird had a high status and had never suffered before in the sect. There was no way it was going to give in so easily. If Su Zimo let it go, it might even come back and cause a greater ruckus. "Stay here for 3 months. I'll let you off after the 5 peaks face off," Su Zimo remarked casually. "Caw, caw." Instantly, Little Crane's expression changed as it yelled at Su Zimo as though threatening him. Scoffing coldly, Su Zimo pretended as though he saw nothing and left his cave abode, riding his flying sword towards Elixir Peak. Knowing how to refine spirit-gathering elixirs was not enough for him to be the number 1 of Elixir Peak. The greatest difficulty of weapon refinement lies in spirit gathering. As for elixir refinement, the difficulty lies in the deep knowledge that was required of all the various types of spirit herbs. An elementary elixir refinement master would be able to differentiate between the spirit herbs for grade 1 elixirs as well as their attributes and the temperature they could endure. Someone who was unfamiliar with those things would be put in a spot if someone were to give them a recipe and they did not know of the spirit herbs listed. If so, how could they refine any elixirs? Incredible elixir refinement masters would be able to understand the recipe's description based on their imaginations and creativity. From there, they could refine new elixirs using their own ratios. But of course, Su Zimo was still far from that. Su Zimo's motive for heading to Elixir Peak was to exchange for a record of grade 1 spirit herbs so that he could memorize them. Thereafter, he would exchange for some recipes and spirit herbs to continue practicing on refinement. Before long, Su Zimo returned to his cave abode. For the next few days, he worked on raising his cultivation and elixir refinement. Trapped in the formation, Little Crane had nothing to eat and had lost weight, looking even more pitiful. The spirit tiger could not bear to see it suffer, and hence, when it hunted for food outside, it would bring some back for Little Crane as well, chatting with it every now and then. During this period, the relationship between the tiger and Crane had improved quite a bit. Only, the way Little Crane looked at Su Zimo was still filled with resentment and pride. Su Zimo could not be bothered. This day, he refined another cauldron of elixirs with 4 supreme grade and the rest being superior grades. Just as Su Zimo was about to keep the elixirs, he had an idea. Even though he was not going to consume those elixirs, they still contained the essence of spirit herbs. He wondered if they would work to help spirit beasts raise their cultivation faster too. At that thought, Su Zimo walked towards the spirit tiger with the fragrant-smelling elixirs. Right as he was about to ask, the spirit tiger wagged its tail with a pandering look. Its mouth was gaping and saliva was almost drooling. All right, that saved him the question. Look at your worthless expression. Su Zimo scolded jokingly before tossing some of the freshly refined elixirs over. The spirit tiger leapt into the air and opened its mouth, catching an elixir and chewing in satisfaction. When Little Crane, who was trapped in the formation, saw that, it was stunned. That works too. It was completely stupefied. It had taken elixirs in the past before. However, even if its mother was the mystical guardian beast, the elixirs given to her were middle grade at best. Little Crane had never seen someone like Su Zimo who would feed a dog superior grade elixirs. To Little Crane, the way the spirit tiger fawned with a wagging tail earlier on was no different from a dog. Little Crane had a clear view of everything. There were even supreme grade elixirs. How extravagant. How wasteful. How exciting. How sinful. But, I like it. Little Crane jumped on the ground excitedly and winked at Spirit Tiger, trying to signal to it. There were many cultivators who reared spirit beasts in the cultivation world. However, only few of them would be willing to feed their spirit beasts with elixirs, much less superior or supreme grade elixirs. Cultivators would not even bear to eat those elixirs, much less feed their spirit beasts. Little Crane felt that it was getting along quite well with the spirit tiger these days, and it was implying for the latter to share some elixirs with it. The spirit tiger glanced at Little Crane and hesitated for a long time. Finally, it picked up an elixir of the worst quality from the ground and tossed it into the smoke-gathering formation. Little Crane was enraged, but it couldn't do anything at all. Twerking its butt, the spirit tiger ran back and clawed a circle on the ground, protecting the rest of the elixirs in front of it. It looked like it was ready to fight anyone to the death if they dared touch those pills. Su Zimo shook his head and smiled. Retrieving a couple of jade bottles from his storage bag, he poured all the elixirs within in front of the spirit tiger. Most of them were superior grade elixirs with some supreme grade ones, even the lowest quality was at middle grade. He remarked, "It's all for you. Hurry and raise your cultivation." The spirit tiger was bedazzled. This happiness came too suddenly. Joy has finally come to me. The spirit tiger dove head first into the pile of elixirs and nearly fainted from the fragrance of it all. Little Crane was getting more and more anxious as it watched, crying repeatedly, but her voice could not be heard at all. "How can you finish so many elixirs? Share some with me." After a moment, the spirit tiger regained its senses and swallowed another few elixirs. It then sprawled on the ground and began snoring. Every spirit beast knew how to cultivate innately. However, certain spirit beasts with powerful bloodlines would contain a memory heritage that would make their cultivation techniques even stronger. The spirit tiger merely had an ordinary bloodline, and its cultivation technique would never be able to match the marrow cleansing section, let alone the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. The thought of imparting the marrow cleansing section to the spirit tiger so that it could turn stronger had crossed Su Zimo's mind as well. However, Diyu had once warned him not to impart the skill to anyone else, and as such, Su Zimo could only abandon that thought. Seeing that no one was paying attention to it, Little Crane felt extremely aggrieved. Left with no choice, it picked an elixir left behind by the spirit tiger earlier and began cultivating. Within a couple of days, the tiger and Crane finished all the elixirs. Even though Little Crane's cultivation rose, it wasn't obvious because it was a spirit demon and did not consume much elixirs to begin with. However, the spirit tiger's aura was clearly much more ferocious. Its gaze had turned more sinister and its fur was now golden, standing erect like shimmering needles. If it continued cultivating as such, it wouldn't be long before the spirit tiger became a Foundation Establishment realm spirit demon. After the elixirs were consumed, both the spirit tiger and Little Crane were yearning for more as they looked at Su Zimo wistfully, waiting for him to refine. By now, the spirit herbs that Su Zimo had exchanged for were used up entirely. Because he no longer had any contribution points, he would have to use spirit stones if he wanted to exchange for spirit herbs at Elixir Peak. However, Su Zimo required spirit stones to raise his cultivation. Meeting the anticipating gazes of the two spirit beasts, Su Zimo merely shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. I can't refine any more elixirs. I'm out of spirit herbs. It was like thunder striking. The news was a huge blow to the tiger and crane. Both of them were addicted and had yet to enjoy to their heart's contentment. However, he was going to stop. Chapter 114, Trump Card. Chapter 114, Trump Card. The reason why Su Zimo wanted to stop refining elixirs was because he no longer needed it. Similar to weapon refinement, Su Zimo no longer had to waste time on it now that he could refine inferior-grade spirit weapons. There were 2 months left to the year-end face-off. At the moment, Su Zimo's cultivation was at level 7 Qi condensation. Coupled with the perfect elixirs he had refined previously, it was not going to be an issue for him to reach level 9 Qi condensation by the end of the year. However, perfected Qi condensation was impossible for him. At perfected Qi condensation, the Dantian would open up like a vast sea of Qi and one would be much stronger than at level 9. That was something that required elixirs, spirit stones, and a long period of cultivation. Even cultivators with heaven spirit roots were no exception to that rule. During this period of time, Little Crane had consumed quite a bit of Su Zimo's elixirs. Even though it was still trapped in the smoke-gathering formation, its relationship with Su Zimo had improved. Despite that, Su Zimo did not dare to let Little Crane out. This day, Little Fatty arrived at Su Zimo's cave abode once more. When he saw that Su Zimo's cultivation had risen, he felt relieved and thought that Su Zimo had finally picked himself up. At the moment, Little Fatty's cultivation realm was at the peak of level 8 Qi condensation. By the end of the year, he was definitely going to hit level 9 Qi condensation. Even though his progress was already very fast, it was still slightly inferior compared to Feng Haoyu and Leng Ro. In theory, the cultivation speed of heaven spirit roots should not lose out to variant spirit roots. Su Zimo had vaguely sensed that Little Fatty's physique was different. Even though it could not be compared to his, it was definitely much stronger than most other Qi refinement warriors. There was a possibility that Little Fatty had used a portion of his spirit Qi on tempering his body. That might be why he was not on the same level as Feng Haoyu and Leng Ro. The reason for Little Fatty's arrival was naturally to impart to Su Zimo the various methods of sword wielding and fighting between cultivators. As Xian Yi had mentioned, the fights between Qi refinement warriors were relatively simple and there weren't many things to mention, most of it had to be learned through practical experience. For that month, Little Fatty stayed in Su Zimo's cave abode. As the both of them sparred daily, Su Zimo's sword-wielding skills were becoming more and more proficient. Initially, Su Zimo was at a complete disadvantage. Each time Little Fatty summoned his flying sword, he could suppress Su Zimo in less than 3 moves. However, as time went on, Su Zimo was gradually able to match Little Fatty evenly. Subsequently, the Spirit Tiger even joined the fights and attacked Su Zimo together with Little Fatty. At the beginning, Su Zimo was not used to being attacked by Little Fatty and the Spirit Tiger together. However, as his sword-wielding skills improved, he was able to hold his ground without losing out. During this period of time, what puzzled Little Fatty at the most was that despite being at level 7 Qi condensation, Su Zimo was completely able to match him who was at level 8. That implied that the quality of Su Zimo's spirit Qi was far superior compared to Little Fatty's. But, that didn't make any sense. Both of them had heaven spirit roots, so why would there be a level of difference between their spirit Qi? Little Fatty had asked about it before as well, but Su Zimo merely shook his head, indicating that he was unclear too. In truth, Su Zimo had a theory. It was because a change in quality would occur after spirit Qi enters his body through his right hand, causing it to be even purer within his body. Vaguely, Su Zimo had the feeling that his right hand might have something else that Dai Yu left for him. That was the reason why he could produce the level 3 spirit fire too. However, everything was so strange that Su Zimo would naturally not mention it to anyone else. This day, Little Fatty had plans to leave. He had already taught Su Zimo most of what he had learned in Spirit Peak. It was meaningless to stay any longer. Before he left, Little Fatty suddenly declared mysteriously, "Bro, I know it seems like we're rather evenly matched recently. But, actually, I have a trump card." "Oh?" Su Zimo raised his brow. A smug look flashed through Little Fatty's eyes as he chuckled. "Bro, I've actually been cultivating a body tempering technique that takes up quite a bit of spirit chi. If not for that, I would be able to hit perfected chi condensation by the end of the year." Indeed, Su Zimo had guessed correctly. When he saw that Su Zimo did not have a stark reaction, Little Fatty thought that it was because he did not understand the benefits of body tempering. Because of that, he rushed forward excitedly. "Bro, you haven't fought with cultivators who had tempered bodies before. If I make use of my trump card, you'll definitely lose for sure. Is that so?" Su Zimo chuckled and asked. When he heard that, Little Fatty glared at him and harumphed gently, "Bro, if you still don't believe me, we can have another spar so that I can show you my technique." "Very well." Su Zimo nodded in agreement. Little Fatty summoned a fatty. It was a pseudo-spirit weapon. Among the 5 peaks, there were not many trial disciples who had an inferior grade spirit weapon. Because Little Fatty had just joined for less than a year, he naturally did not have one too. During their normal spars, Su Zimo naturally did not use the inferior grade flying swords that he had created. Instead, he would also use a pseudo-spirit weapon. Go! A stream of spirit chi shot out from both their fingertips into their flying swords. Shuttling through the cave abode, both flying swords clashed against one another. Cling! Clang! The sounds of metal clashing echoed as sparks flew. In terms of sword wielding, both of them were evenly matched and neither party's flying sword could break the other's defense. Right then, Little Fatty hollered and slapped on his storage bag, summoning a gigantic axe. The gigantic axe looked to be the same size as Little Fatty and it appeared extremely strange when he wielded it. While their flying swords were fighting in mid-air, Little Fatty took advantage of the chance and tunneled forth. A golden light shone on the surface of his body as he suddenly arrived before Su Zimo, swifter than ever. Swoosh! The gigantic axe tore through the voids and descended from the skies menacingly. Before it got close, Su Zimo's hair was already pushed backwards. "Huh, bro. You lost." Little Fatty burst out in laughter. As the gigantic axe was about to strike Su Zimo's head, Little Fatty hurriedly held back. Right then, with an unchanged expression, Su Zimo suddenly reached out and grabbed the incoming axe. Bang! Even though the gigantic axe had met with flesh, the sound that echoed felt like it was defeated. The gigantic axe could not advance anymore. Little Fatty's face turned pale with fright as he rushed over and asked in panic, "Bro, are you alright? Why did you grab my weapon?" Su Zimo had already tossed the axe onto the ground and retracted his nails discreetly. Holding up Su Zimo's hand, Little Fatty checked it back and forth. There was no damage done at all. He was alright? Completely unharmed? Little Fatty's gaze towards Su Zimo changed gradually. No matter how strong his body was, there was no way he would dare to receive a weapon with his bare hands. That was akin to courting death. However, Little Fatty had witnessed the scene unfold right before his eyes. Before Little Fatty managed to retract his momentum, Su Zimo had already stopped the axe. The feeling was no different from chopping an unshakable mountain. "Bro, you..." Little Fatty's eyes were filled with astonishment. Su Zimo chuckled casually. "I've also cultivated body tempering techniques before. You've got to help me hide it." For sure." "Definitely." Little Fatty nodded instinctively. Chapter 115, Face-Off Commencement. Chapter 115, Face-Off Commencement. When Little Fatty left Su Zimo's cave abode, he was still filled with doubts. In a daze, he had not snapped out of what happened earlier. There were no lack of amazing body tempering techniques in the cultivation world. However, he had never heard of one which the user could catch weapons bare-handed. And he wasn't injured at all. Even demons who were known for their powerful bodies might not dare to do such a thing. Suddenly, little Fatty recalled the scene of them entering the sect. Su Zimo was carrying him while dealing with a spirit demon on the walls of the peak. That wasn't something that could be done with just body tempering. Frowning, little Fatty remembered the moment when his gigantic axe met with Su Zimo's palm. Other than the dull thud, there were some other strange noises. It was as though something sharp had scratched on his weapon, making a crisp sound. Because everything had happened so suddenly, little Fatty did not think too much into it. However, things felt odd in retrospect. Instinctively, he took out his gigantic axe and swept it with his gaze. Instantly, his pupils constricted as the hair on his back stood up. He was petrified. There were 5 small holes on the surface of the axe. With a deep breath of air, little Fatty composed himself and gestured his palm on the axe. He placed his palm on the blade of the axe. His fingers fit exactly where the 5 holes were. Broop. Little Fatty gulped. Keeping his axe hurriedly, he adjusted his emotions and calmed himself before leaving. In the cave abode, Su Zimo looked at his palm and sighed gently. He had merely wanted to grab little Fatty's axe on a whim earlier on. He didn't expect that he couldn't suppress the power of blood and forced out those sharp nails. It may not have been a big deal to be seen by little Fatty. However, if seniors of the sect saw it, they might turn suspicious and that might even reveal his demonic bloodline. This matter is ultimately a problem. Su Zimo shook his head with a look of worry on his face. It was 1 month away from the year-end face-off. Su Zimo's cultivation had just risen to level 8 chi condensation. He retrieved the weapon tripod from his storage bag. No matter what, he had to master the tripartite sword formation within the month. It would be best if he could master the hexagonal sword formation too. That would increase his chances of victory against Feng Haoyu. The prerequisite of cultivating a sword formation was that one had to possess a set of flying swords. Su Zimo already had an inferior grade flying sword. He had to refine 5 more. For him, refining inferior grade flying swords was no longer a problem. He had the help of his spirit perception for the aspect of spirit gathering, turning it into a 100% success rate. However, he was still unable to refine middle-grade spirit weapons for some unknown reason. After a day, Su Zimo managed to refine 5 inferior-grade flying swords to make up a set. In his cave abode, he recalled the contents of the tripartite sword formation and began to cultivate. An extremely high mastery of flying swords was required for sword formations. The setup had to be perfect. Fortunately, Su Zimo had established a firm foundation in sword-wielding thanks to little Fatty's help through the past month. Now, what he had to learn was how to control multiple flying swords. In the final month, the atmosphere in the 5 peaks was clearly much more dense. Most disciples were holed up in their cave abodes cultivating, preparing to showcase their prowess in the face-off. The commotion caused by the mysterious challenger of Array Peak had gradually simmered as well. Previously, the identity of the mysterious challenger had become the most popular topic amongst disciples of the 5 peaks, with everyone guessing at his identity daily. However, the discussions had mostly died down as the end of the year approached. This day, a bell sounded from Ethereal Palace. There were a total of 5 sounds. The 5 peaks face-off had officially commenced. Many trial disciples appeared from their cave abodes one after another, speeding towards Weapon Peak with energized expressions. The 5 peaks face-off lasted 5 days. Because Weapon and Elixir peaks were the weakest, according to the previous year's arrangement, their face-offs were arranged on the first and second day. However, things were different this year. Every one of the 5 peaks knew of Feng Haoyu and Su Zimo's challenge. Coincidentally, both of them were going to take part in the Weapon and Elixir peak face-offs. Be it refinement or weapons or elixirs, both took a huge toll on one's spirit chi, energy and mental state. In order to ensure that the both of them could take part in the face-offs in their best condition, the 5 peak masters agreed that they would separate the events. First day, Weapon peak face-off. Second day, Talisman peak face-off. Third day, Elixir peak face-off. 4th day, Array Peak Face-Off. 5th day, Spirit Peak Face-Off. Because the Spirit Peak Face-Off was the most anticipated event among the 5 peaks, it was always on the last day every year. The reason why they arranged for the Array Peak Face-Off before it was so that Feng Haoyu could get sufficient rest and prepare for the Spirit Peak Face-Off. Weapon Peak's Face-Off was held in the Weapon Refinement Hall. On the first day, nearly all disciples of the 5 peaks had gathered outside the Weapon Refinement Hall. There were even inner sect disciples gathering. Weapon Peak had never seen such a crowd before. At a glance, the entire place was densely packed with people. The reason for this was because Weapon Peak's face-off was the first round of challenge between Feng Haoyu and Su Zimo. All eyes were on this. Everyone wanted to know who would have the last laugh in weapon refinement, the talent of Spirit Peak, Feng Haoyu, with his Wind Spirit Root, or Su Zimo with his level 3 Spirit Fire. Prior to this, disciples of the 5 peaks had already secretly wagered on the outcome. The 5 peak masters sat right at the front of the Weapon Refinement Hall. There were more than 100 participating disciples standing below. As for the spectating disciples, they could only stand outside and were not allowed to enter lest they disrupted the weapon refinement process. Make way, make way. A holler sounded from outside the crowd as though someone had arrived. The crowd parted to the sides, revealing a passageway. Hands behind his back, a purple-robed Qi refinement warrior strode in. With a haughty expression, he entered the Weapon Refinement Hall. It was Feng Haoyu. Amazing. He's already at perfected Qi condensation. That's not all. I'm telling you, senior brother Feng already hit perfected Qi condensation more than a month ago. Right now, he's only a single step away from entering Foundation Establishment realm. I wonder what cultivation Su Zimo is at right now. If he's too far apart, there won't be anything to look forward to for their sparring. Right then, someone shouted among the crowd. Su Zimo is here. Everyone looked over. Not far away, Su Zimo arrived on his flying sword. Still clad in green robes, he looked calm as though he was in no pressure at all. Ha! A disciple could not help but scoff. Am I seeing things? He's only at level 8 Qi condensation. Fufu, you were right. The difference between them is 2 levels. The outcome is obvious without them even fighting. Another disciple shook his head and laughed, his ears clearly filled with disdain. If I were Su Zimo, I would admit defeat as soon as possible lest I get beaten up too badly in public and embarrass myself. Chapter 116, What is he refining? Chapter 116, What is he refining? Despite the ridicules of the crowd, Su Zimo remained expressionless. As if he had not heard anything, he walked straight to the Weapon Refinement Hall. As he had spent 3 months on Array Peak and placed much effort into learning about sword formations, Su Zimo's cultivation had not reached his expected level 9 Qi condensation. But of course, there were still a couple more days before his final battle with Feng Haoyu. If Su Zimo were to seize the chance to cultivate during the few days, he would have a chance to reach level 9 Qi condensation. Bro, good luck. Little Fatty's voice rang out from the crowd as he thumped his fist towards Su Zimo. Smiling, Su Zimo nodded his head and entered the Weapon Refinement Hall. Within the hall, Shui Yi and the others nodded their heads to greet Su Zimo. Junior brother Su, don't let those nasty remarks distract you. Calm yourself and you'll definitely win. Shui Yi whispered when Su Zimo walked by him. Yes. You too, senior brother Shui. Su Zimo replied with a smile. Don't worry. I've managed to cultivate a level 2 spirit fire by now. I might not lose to Feng Haoyu too. Shui Yi's eyes flashed with confidence. It was not easy for someone in their Qi condensation realm to cultivate a level 2 spirit fire as well. This time round, Su Zimo did not stand at the back of the hall. Instead, he walked right to the front and stood in the same row as Feng Haoyu. A tense aura gradually spread through the hall. Junior brother Su, I haven't seen you for half a year. Even though your cultivation hasn't increased much, you seem to have gotten much more daring. Feng Haoyu glanced at Su Zimo and remarked blandly. I've always been daring. Su Zimo's tone was indifferent as he did not even look over. Feng Haoyu continued, if you beg for mercy and admit defeat now, I'll give you some face after the Spirit Peak face-off and let you suffer a less shameful defeat. Is that so? Su Zimo smiled calmly. Of course, Feng Haoyu did not simply want to bicker with Su Zimo. His main goal was to disrupt Su Zimo's mind. Be it weapon or elixir refinement, any bit of distraction could result in a failure. Unfortunately, Feng Haoyu did not manage his goal. His two punches seemed as though they were hitting cotton and harmless. By the way, I forgot to tell you something. Feng Haoyu's lips curled as he extended his palm. With a swoosh, a flame rose in it. Dark red color, it was a level 2 spirit fire. Immediately after, Feng Haoyu's palm stirred as a spirit wind was injected into the level 2 spirit fire. Swoosh! The flames grew in size and the color intensified, transforming into scarlet in the blink of an eye. Level 3 spirit fire. Immediately, Feng Haoyu's voice rang out. I've also managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. In front of me, your greatest support is nothing at all. It was clear that Feng Haoyu was trying to apply more pressure to Su Zimo. The more pressure Su Zimo was under, the more nervous he would be and the easier he would commit mistakes. A roar of surprise overtook the crowd outside when they saw the level 3 spirit fire in Feng Haoyu's palms. At first, I thought that this first match might be very intense. Now, it seems as though Su Zimo does not have much of a chance at winning. That's right. With the same level of spirit fire, how can Su Zimo's weapon refinement techniques match against senior brother Feng? Shui Yi's eyes darkened. He had given it his all to cultivate a level 2 spirit fire. He had thought that he could compete with Feng Haoyu, but he was still a little too weak. The other disciples participating in the face-off looked grim and nervous. Within the hall, Su Zimo was the only one who was calm as ever. He only glanced at it briefly before turning back. All 5 peak masters could not help but praise internally when they saw what happened. No matter what, Su Zimo's calm and composed attitude was enough to stand above the entire crowd. The disheveled old man stood up and gestured for silence with both hands as the crowd gradually quietened down. All disciples participating in the Weapon Peak face-off can come forth and select spirit materials. It is up to you what sort of weapon you want to create. Once the refinement is over, the victor will be judged after the weapons are submitted. Once the disheveled old man said that, the disciples in the hall went forth and chose the spirit components they wanted. There were more than 10 types of spirit components displayed, with the majority comprising of pure gold ores, the main material required for refining flying swords. There were comparatively less of other spirit components. The first step of weapon refinement, material selection, required some know-hows as well. If one were to refine a flying sword, other than pure gold ore, they merely needed 2 or 3 other supplementary spirit components. If they were to add in too many, there would be too much impurities, which would result in a difficult refinement with a longer time required. During each Weapon Peak face-off, there were no disciples who could refine an inferior grade spirit weapon. Everyone refined pseudo-spirit weapons. Because of that, they were judged based on quality and the time taken to complete. Before long, many disciples were done with material selection. Su Zimo was the only one still hovering around the spirit components, thinking about something. Now that he already had 6 flying swords, it would seem excessive to refine another one. After much thought, he took a little of the different spirit components and headed back. That action of his attracted the ridicule of many. The more types of spirit components there were, the heavier the weapon created. If he was refining a flying sword, it would lose its advantage of being agile and it wouldn't be worth it. Is that Su Zimo stupid or what? Don't tell me he's trying to refine a huge hammer, right? Haha. From the looks of it, it's possible. Don't laugh. Who knows, he might be trying to refine a gigantic flying sword that would scare the hell out of you. There was a commotion outside the hall. Even the disheveled old man frowned confusedly at what Su Zimo was doing. The disciples headed back to their respective positions and took out their weapon tripods. They were all prepared. With a wave of his hand, the disheveled old man said darkly, "Let the weapon peak face-off commence." The moment he said that, the hall was filled with flames. Balls of spirit fire danced in the palms of many disciples, illuminating the hall in red. The crowd outside had quietened down too. Among them, Feng Haoyu and Su Zimo's level 3 spirit fires were the most eye-catching. Right after them was Shui Yi's level 2 spirit fire. Second step of weapon refinement, tripod warming. Almost at the same time, Feng Haoyu and Su Zimo were the first to be done with the tripod warming and insert their spirit components. Both of their movements were extremely fluid. It was clear they had put in a lot of effort. The 5 peak masters nodded approvingly. The scarlet flames burned under their weapon tripods as the temperature within rose. Before long, the spirit components showed signs of melting. Because Su Zimo had a wider mix of spirit components, his speed of smelting was evidently slower. Even with a level 3 spirit fire, Su Zimo had already fallen behind most of the disciples for this step. After an hour, the liquid within Feng Haoyu's tripod no longer reduced and he was done with the first smelting. Within Su Zimo's weapon tripod, the spirit components had only just started to melt. Burning scarlet red, they bubbled and impurities continued to be purged away. Right then, Feng Haoyu's advantage was obvious as he was far ahead of Su Zimo. However, Su Zimo was in no rush. Unhurriedly, he looked at the spirit components within his tripod and constantly increased the temperature of his flames to purge as much impurities as possible. By the time Feng Haoyu was done with forging and had started on tempering, Su Zimo was only just done with smelting. He was a full 2 steps behind. The amount of spirit component liquid left in Su Zimo's weapon tripod was significant. It was more than enough to refine a couple of flying swords, much less one. Just what sort of a spirit weapon was he refining? That question crossed everyone's mind. Chapter 117, Scared Away. Chapter 117, Scared Away. What Su Zimo wanted to refine was a gigantic axe. During this period of time, Little Fatty had helped him a lot. The last time the both of them fought, Su Zimo unintentionally dug 5 holes into Little Fatty's gigantic axe. This gigantic axe was made for Little Fatty. Another hour passed. The other cultivators had begun forging but Su Zimo was only just done with smelting. Assuming a lotus position, he recovered spirit chi while waiting for the weapon tripod to cool down. A few disciples were already eliminated by this step. Those disciples did not manage to control the temperature and failed to be able to forge, wasting all their previous efforts. Another 15 minutes passed. Suddenly, Su Zimo stood up and created a pair of hands using spirit chi. Reaching into the weapon tripod, he began to forge. On the other side, tinkling sounds could be heard. Feng Haoyu was already at tempering. Each time his wind hammer landed, it would remove some impurities from the flying sword, solidifying it further. Every single strike of the wind hammer on the scarlet flying sword would send sparks flying. Landing on the bottom of the tripod, those sparks were actually the impurities of the flying sword. At Su Zimo's side, he was done with forging. What's that? A gigantic axe? Furthermore, that axe is way too stupid. Controlling it would just waste spirit chi. Who would use it? That's right. That axe has already lost the nimbleness and agility that a spirit weapon should have. On the contrary, it's more like a weapon a boorish punk would use without any form of advantages. Outside the hall, many disciples were already making a conclusion toward Su Zimo's axe. Little Fatty was the only one whose heart skipped a beat. Blinking his eyes, a possibility came to mind. Su Zimo's expression was calm as always. After forging, he ignited his level 3 spirit fire once more and started heating up the gigantic axe. It didn't take long before the gigantic axe was heated to a red crystalline state. Just as Su Zimo was about to begin tempering, Feng Haoyu was already done with that step. At that moment, Feng Haoyu hesitated. The next step was the all-important spirit gathering. Right now, Feng Haoyu's advantage was obvious. Be it in terms of the spirit weapon's shape or refinement speed, he was superior against Su Zimo. However, if he failed the spirit gathering and his flying sword exploded, he would be eliminated on the spot. Immense boldness was required for one to attempt spirit gathering. In the past few months, Feng Haoyu had truly succeeded in spirit gathering once. However, he did not dare to gamble on such a crucial moment. After hesitating for a long time, Feng Haoyu decided to give up on spirit gathering and dipped his flying sword into cold water. With a clang, green smoke billowed as the flying sword was formed. Feng Haoyu was now the first to refine a spirit weapon in the weapon peak face-off. He placed the flying sword at the front desk and returned to his position, looking at Su Zimo calmly. Senior brother Feng won. That's right. Unless Su Zimo succeeds in spirit gathering, he won't have a chance of winning. Succeed in spirit gathering? Fufu, can that even happen? Don't forget, he just joined the sect for less than a year. In such an intense situation, even an advanced weapon refinement master would have a much lower success rate of spirit gathering. Many of the spirit peak disciples spectating outside heaved a sigh of relief. The second person to complete his weapon tempering was Shui Yi of Weapon Peak. With a level 2 spirit fire in his possession, Shui Yi's weapon tempering speed was superior compared to others too. The next step was spirit gathering. Unlike Feng Haoyu, Shui Yi did not give up and chose to attempt spirit gathering. When the disheveled old man saw that, he nodded to himself. To be fair, Feng Haoyu was indeed quite talented in weapon refinement, even more so than Shui Yi. However, he lacked the boldness. If Feng Haoyu had chosen to attempt spirit gathering, the disheveled old man would have thought better of him. Even disciples who did not have knowledge of weapon refinement, they knew how difficult it was to attempt spirit gathering. Therefore, Shui Yi's choice attracted quite a bit of attention. With a solemn expression, Shui Yi controlled the spirit chi within the weapon tripod warily and channeled it towards the flying sword. Crack! A crisp sound rang out from within the tripod, reverberating through the hall loud and clear. It was broken. Shui Yi realized that something was wrong. The disciples watching shook their heads. That was the sound of cracks forming on the sword. True enough. The next moment, yet another crack sounded out. A boom echoed out from Shui Yi's weapon tripod as his flying sword exploded. Shrapnel shot against the inner walls of the tripod, producing tinkling sounds. The spirit gathering had failed. Shui Yi chuckled bitterly before putting away his weapon tripod. He bowed to the 5 peak masters and left the weapon refinement hall. The explosion of the flying sword meant that he was eliminated. Following that, other disciples were finishing up with their weapon refinements. Apart from Shui Yi, no one else attempted spirit gathering. Right then, Su Zimo heaved out an air of relief as he was done with his tempering. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone fixed their gaze on Su Zimo. Some of the Weapon Peak disciples had looks of anticipation. Su Zimo was now Weapon Peak's final hope. If he failed, that would mean that the number 1 of Weapon Peak would be taken away by disciples of other peaks. Even though they were all of the same sect, it wasn't an honor for disciples of Weapon Peak. Su Zimo paused for a moment and suddenly, he did something that shocked everyone. He removed his weapon tripod. What is he doing? Is he giving up on spirit gathering? I'm not sure. If Su Zimo wanted to give up on spirit gathering, all he had to do was take the gigantic axe out of the weapon tripod and dip it in cold water. There was no need to remove the weapon tripod. Right after, in front of everyone, Su Zimo started channeling the surrounding spirit chi towards the gigantic axe with a solemn expression. Spirit gathering. He had chosen to attempt spirit gathering. However, this was quite a bizarre scene before them. All through history, there had never been a weapon refinement master who would remove their weapon tripod while conducting spirit gathering. That was completely pointless and way too dangerous for the weapon refinement master. If the spirit gathering failed and the spirit weapon exploded, the first person to suffer would be the weapon refinement master himself. When the disheveled old man saw that, his heart skipped a beat as he stood up instinctively, wanting to stop Su Zimo. However, Su Zimo had already begun. If the disheveled old man said something to distract Su Zimo, the spirit gathering may end up failing. Frowning, the disheveled old man hesitated for a long time before sitting down. He was extremely tense and was prepared to save Su Zimo immediately. Feng Haoyu, who was initially standing beside Su Zimo, was shocked by the latter's action and dodged aside right away. Right then, Su Zimo turned his head while spirit gathering and gave a fake smile. "Why are you running? You're afraid?" That statement caused an uproar outside the hall. When it came to spirit gathering, one would usually have to focus intently to prevent mistakes. No one would behave like Su Zimo. Not only did he remove his weapon tripod, he was even chatting with others. Wasn't that just courting death? However, no one knew that Su Zimo's spirit gathering method was based on his spirit perception. Even if he was distracted, his spirit perception would warn him immediately about any signs of incoming failure. Su Zimo would then naturally stop. Lunatic. Feng Haoyu scolded coldly before retreating a couple of steps more. There were initially some other disciples besides Su Zimo. Some of them had just finished refining their weapons. However, they did not even bother to submit their flying swords before they dodged him like the plague. Some disciples were still tempering their spirit weapons. When they saw what happened, they ran off without caring about their weapons in the tripod, hating their parents for not giving them an extra pair of legs. It was chaos within the weapon refinement hall. In the blink of an eye, other than the 5 peak masters, there was no one else left around Su Zimo. Chapter 118, Number 1 of Weapon Peak. Chapter 118, Number 1 of Weapon Peak. This was the first time a scene this chaotic had happened during a weapon peak face-off. But of course, it was also because there hasn't been someone like Su Zimo in history. In the eyes of everyone, he was a lunatic who did not care for his life. I think he's creating a scene on purpose because he knows that he's going to lose. In my opinion, Su Zimo has some ulterior motives. The way he behaved earlier seemed as though he was trying to hurt senior brother Feng. Maybe if that happens, the both of them won't have to fight anymore. The crowd outside the hall was rife with guesses. Su Zimo, are you going to attempt spirit gathering or are you giving up? Why are you doing something so strange? Spirit Peak's master, Wen Xian, asked harshly with furrowed brows. Su Zimo laughed. Of course I'm attempting spirit gathering. Why are you removing your weapon tripod for spirit gathering? Wen Xian asked again. Why not? Su Zimo reversed the question, rendering Wen Xian speechless. Indeed, there was no such rule that stated that spirit gathering had to be conducted within a weapon tripod. Su Zimo's actions were merely so strange that no one could comprehend. Right then, Su Zimo turned to look at Feng Haoyu while spirit gathering, chuckling and asking, Feng Haoyu, did you think that you were going to win? Humph. Feng Haoyu harumphed coldly, I don't believe you can succeed in spirit gathering. Very well. I'll show you. In truth, during that short conversation, Su Zimo had already attempted multiple spirit gatherings. However, he stopped in time after sensing danger. This time round, a faint imprint of a spirit pattern appeared on the axe without any warning alerts. Su Zimo was elated. Success. Buzz. With a tremble, the axe glowed brightly, emitting a bedazzling light. A spirit pattern. The discussions outside the hall gradually died down. Many disciples watched dumbfounded with agape mouths, their eyeballs nearly dropping out of their sockets. He had managed to succeed in spirit gathering? Didn't they say that spirit gathering was difficult? How was it that Su Zimo had managed to create a spirit pattern even while chatting idly? Not to mention the many disciples outside the hall, even the 5 peak masters were stunned and filled with questions. Was it luck? Coincidence? What had just happened? At the end of the day, the other 4 peak masters did not have a deep understanding of weapon refinement. All of them looked at the disheveled old man questioningly. Pondering for a long time, the disheveled old man could not come up with an answer and shook his head as well. With Su Zimo's success in spirit gathering, there was no doubt about his status as the number 1 for this face-off. Feng Haoyu's face turned ugly instantly. Even if he was faster in refining his weapon, it was a pseudo-spirit weapon without any grades. He won. Haha. Our peak won. Well done, junior brother Su. After a momentary silence, a series of cheers broke out from the crowd. Those spirit peak disciples who had initially thought highly of Feng Haoyu lowered their heads in defeat. Even at this moment, they were still confused as to how Su Zimo had managed to succeed in spirit gathering. Furthermore, he looked as though he was extremely relaxed. Others may learn about weapon refinement for many years without being able to refine an inferior grade spirit weapon. Yet, this lad was able to create one even while chatting? Feng Haoyu composed himself swiftly. Sneering coldly, he turned to leave. Very well, very well. You win this round. We'll compete again on Elixir Peak's face-off. Even though his voice could be heard, he had already disappeared into the crowd. With a loud clang, Su Zimo dipped the gigantic axe into cold water. Instantly, an inferior-grade gigantic axe was formed. Shining with a cold aura, it looked formidable as though it could cleave an entire mountain. Humph. So what if it's an inferior-grade spirit weapon? Which chi refinement warrior would use such a stupid axe? What a joke. A spirit peak disciple remarked sourly. That's not a nice thing to say. That's the type of weapon I like. Little Fatty was displeased on the spot. That spirit weapon disciple sneered coldly, what's the use of liking it? It's not even your spirit weapon. Right then, Su Zimo beckoned to Little Fatty and declared, Fatty, this weapon is made for you. Here, take it. Air. The spirit peak disciple who spoke had a livid expression as he disappeared into the crowd dejectedly. Little Fatty stumbled over to Su Zimo excitedly. Rubbing his chubby palms together, he wanted to laugh but he was embarrassed. Bro, for real? It's for me? Till now, Little Fatty did not have a single inferior grade spirit weapon with him. He had not thought that Su Zimo would make one for him personally. Furthermore, this gigantic axe was absolutely suited for him, as though it was a custom-made piece. With this inferior grade spirit weapon, Little Fatty would definitely be able to obtain a good ranking on the Spirit Peak face-off. Yes. Do accept it. Su Zimo nodded his head and passed the gigantic axe to Little Fatty. When Little Fatty took it over, he could not bear to let it go and remarked intoxicatedly, I'm going to hug it to sleep tonight. With that, Little Fatty pecked a wet kiss on the gigantic axe. The 5 peak masters smiled as they saw that. The brown-haired youth said in a low voice, that's quite a favor. It's just a pity. If Su Zimo could make use of the opportunity to create an inferior-grade flying sword for himself, he might improve his chances of winning against Feng Haoyu, Xian Yi remarked. Wen Xian shook his head. The difference in strength between him and Feng Haoyu is too great. It's not something a couple of inferior-grade spirit weapons can make up for. The disheveled old man waved it off. No matter. Su Zimo can select an inferior-grade spirit weapon of his desire from the spirit weapon chamber for getting number 1 of Weapon Peak. Rising, the disheveled old man declared, the outcome of this Weapon Peak face-off is obvious. The victor is Su Zimo, disciple of Weapon Peak. Many Weapon Peak disciples cheered loudly. The disheveled old man continued, Su Zimo, come up and explain to us the meaning of why you removed your weapon tripod earlier. Su Zimo looked apprehensive. Don't worry. There is no difference between those who are ahead or behind. Anyone who accomplishes the feat is a master. Share your insights so that all of us can learn from it, the disheveled old man encouraged him. Su Zimo walked to the disheveled old man and whispered, Master, my method isn't really suitable for everyone. To be fair, Su Zimo was the only one who could attempt that method of spirit gathering, no one else could imitate it. No matter, just mention a couple of things casually, the disheveled old man persuaded again. Left with no choice, Su Zimo headed up the front. Facing the many disciples of the 5 peaks, he coughed gently. Outside the hall, multiple disciples listened intently. It's actually a personal habit to remove the weapon tripod. I just feel like it'll help boost my chances of success in spirit gathering. Su Zimo braced himself and commented ambiguously. What he did not know was that his casual comment had stuck to the minds of many disciples. Removing the weapon tripod could improve the success rate of spirit gathering. Seeing the sparkle in the eyes of many disciples, Su Zimo continued hurriedly, removing the weapon tripod is a dangerous act. It's best if everyone does not try it. Even though he had said it out of goodwill, many disciples misunderstood that Su Zimo had only said it because he did not want them to learn his spirit gathering method. Hence, for a period of time after this, disciples of the sect began to experience continuous accidents while refining weapons. Failing in spirit gathering, they were left half dead by the fragments of the exploding spirit weapons. Chapter 119, Connate's Spirit Weapon. Chapter 119, Connate's Spirit Weapon. After the weapon peak face-off ended, many disciples dispersed gradually. The disheveled old man stopped Su Zimo. Coming before the spirit weapon chamber, he laughed and said, "The prize for the number 1 of weapon peak is to be able to get a spirit weapon of his choosing in the spirit weapon chamber. Go on in." Su Zimo's achievement of attaining the number 1 of weapon peak was an honor for the disheveled old man as well. The way he looked at Su Zimo was filled with pride. The spirit weapon chamber in weapon peak was filled with pseudo and inferior grade spirit weapons. As for middle grade spirit weapons, only inner sect disciples of Foundation Establishment Realm were qualified to obtain them on ethereal peak. Actually, given Su Zimo's current ability in weapon refinement, inferior grade spirit weapons were no longer attractive to him. However, since it was the sect's spirit weapon chamber after all, he decided to go take a look inside. There are various types of spirit weapons in the spirit weapon chamber. Do you have anything in mind? The disheveled old man asked. Su Zimo shook his head and questioned, "Do you have any suggestions, master?" "Indeed, I do have one." The disheveled old man pondered for a moment before saying, "You have a fight left with Feng Haoyu after the 5 peaks face-off. To be fair, you don't stand much of a chance winning." That was obviously an euphemistic statement. All 5 peak masters felt that Su Zimo had 0 chance of winning. The disheveled old man continued, "Therefore, I suggest you choose an inferior grade defensive spirit weapon. That way, you won't be injured badly even if you lose." In general, spirit weapons were divided into 3 types. For offensive spirit weapons, the most common were flying swords. There were also defensive spirit weapons such as shields, armor and heart-protecting mirrors. Lastly, there were support spirit weapons that came in all shapes, sizes and uses. For offensive spirit weapons, the more spirit patterns and the higher grade they were, the more killing power they possessed. Vice versa, the higher the grade of defensive spirit weapons, the more damage they can prevent. Su Zimo did not comment. Nodding his head, he entered the spirit weapon chamber. Rows of spirit weapons were displayed within the spirit weapon chamber with flying swords taking up the majority. There were less defensive and support spirit weapons. Su Zimo looked through the entire place and did not find anything of particular use to him. For defensive spirit weapons, he could refine them at any moment and he did not have to choose from one here. As for the other spirit weapons, they were of little value to his current state. Right as Su Zimo was about to randomly pick a spirit weapon and leave, he caught sight of a golden light shining for a brief moment at the corner of his eyes. Stopping in his tracks, he turned to look. After checking through the place, he did not find the source of the golden light. He thought that he was seeing things. Standing motionlessly on the spot and pausing for a moment, the golden light shone once more. This time round, Su Zimo saw it clearly. The source of the golden light was from the ground in a corner of the defensive spirit weapon section. Why is the ground reflecting golden light? Feeling that something was amiss, he walked closer to take a better look. The ground seemed to be covered by a golden silk cloth that was filled with dust. It seemed as though it was left there for a long time without anyone bothering about it. The golden light was reflected from this beneath the thick dust covering it. In the spirit weapon chamber, be it pseudo or inferior grade spirit weapons, everything was placed on their respective shelves. What was the reason for the golden silk cloth to be thrown on the ground? Su Zimo used his sleeves to brush away the dust, looking at it intently. The golden silk cloth looked to be a defensive type of inner armor. Weaved with golden thread, it was only a thin layer. With an additional layer of dust covering it on the ground, it was difficult to notice it even when people walked by. It looked to be a pseudo-spirit weapon. The reason why it looked to be was because there was a single spirit pattern on the armor. However, it was broken into several portions, and even injecting spirit chi to it was not enough for it to unleash its strength as a spirit weapon. However, there was a strange thing. If spirit weapons were to receive a devastating blow, the spirit patterns would dissipate rather than break into several portions. In fact, most spirit weapons would end up breaking as well. Yet, the armor before him was not only perfect, its spirit pattern had not dissipated as well. That was quite contradictory. Su Zimo pondered for a moment and decided to take this pseudo-spirit weapon as his reward. Extending his palm, he grabbed the golden inner armor on the ground casually. Just as he was about to turn and leave, his expression changed. I can't lift it. The golden silk armor was still lying motionlessly on the ground. Even though Su Zimo did not activate his power of blood, that single grab of his had at least a ton worth of strength. How is this thing so heavy? Su Zimo was surprised. Using both arms, he grabbed it. However, the golden inner armor was merely slightly lifted with most of it still on the ground. Finally, Su Zimo understood why the golden inner armor was left casually on the ground. If it was placed on the stone racks, they would crumble instantly. Su Zimo's heart stirred. He took off his storage bag and channeled his blood. Instantly, his eyes shone bright red and his veins popped up. As a shocking power burst forth from his body, he yanked the golden inner armor and stuffed it into his storage bag. No matter how heavy something was, it would be light as air inside the storage bag. Slowly, Su Zimo composed his blood, and after his demon form disappeared, he walked out of the spirit weapon chamber. Have you chosen? The disheveled old man was waiting outside as he asked upon Su Zimo's exit. Nodding his head, Su Zimo hesitated for a moment before saying, I saw a strange golden inner armor inside. I've got no idea where it came from, but I brought it out. Golden inner armor? The disheveled old man frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, his expression changed as he exclaimed, Mystic gold silk armor. Mystic gold silk armor? So, that's the name of that pseudo-spirit weapon, Su Zimo murmured softly. Pseudo-spirit weapon? The disheveled old man's gaze turned odd. Isn't it a pseudo-spirit weapon? I saw a spirit pattern on it, but it was broken into several segments and it can't be used. Isn't that considered as just a pseudo-spirit weapon? Su Zimo asked. The disheveled old man looked emotional as he asked, Su Zimo, do you know how many different grades there are for spirit weapons? 4. Inferior, middle, superior and supreme, Su Zimo replied. Pausing for a moment, Su Zimo recalled a speculation he had previously and continued, if 4 spirit patterns create a supreme grade, perhaps there's a perfect grade with 5 spirit patterns. The disheveled old man gave a look of approval and nodded. Not bad. Indeed, there are perfect spirit weapons above supreme grades. Right after, the disheveled old man asked again, but do you know what's above perfect grade? There's more after perfect grades? Su Zimo was surprised. With a deep voice, the disheveled old man said, Connate comes after perfect. Connate spirit weapons. What are Connate spirit weapons? They are created by the universe and formed after absorbing an endless amount of spirit chi. Perfect spirit weapons have 5 spirit patterns, but Connate spirit weapons have 6. The 6th is known as the Connate pattern. Chapter 120, A Terrifying Powerful Being 1,000 Years Ago. Chapter 120, A Terrifying Powerful Being 1,000 Years Ago. Connate pattern? Su Zimo frowned in deep thoughts. The disheveled old man continued, the broken segments on the mystic gold silk armor are the Connate patterns. Since it's Connate, postnatal weapon refinement masters are not able to create it, no matter how powerful they are. Su Zimo gradually returned to his senses. Shocked, he could not help but ask, Master, what you mean to say is that the mystic gold silk armor is a Connate spirit weapon? It was. The disheveled old man drowned in reminiscence as he related slowly. It was said that 1,000 years ago, the mystic gold silk armor was one of the strongest defensive spirit weapons and was well known through the cultivation world. However, it was met with catastrophic damage and its 5 postnatal spirit patterns were destroyed, leaving only the Connate pattern that was broken into several segments. Since a Connate spirit weapon is so strong, what destroyed it? Su Zimo could not help but ask. There are many things that can. The disheveled old man laughed. A Connate spirit weapon is just a spirit weapon at the end of the day. Above spirit weapons are Dharma weapons. For golden cores, spirit weapons are the best type of equipment. However, once you reach nascent soul realm, you will naturally be able to create Dharma weapons and will no longer use spirit weapons. A strong Dharma weapon is able to obliterate a Connate spirit weapon. Those are items on completely different levels. Su Zimo roughly understood. No matter how sharp weapons in the mortal world were, they were easily destroyed by spirit weapons of cultivators as well. So, why is this mystic gold silk armor in Weapon Peak's spirit weapon chamber? Su Zimo felt that since it was a Connate spirit weapon, it should be stronger than other spirit weapons even if it was destroyed. The disheveled old man shook his head. The mystic gold silk armor only has a broken Connate pattern and is equivalent to a pseudo-spirit weapon. Even though it can block against sharp weapons, it's unable to defend against spirit techniques without a spirit pattern. In other words, even though a cultivator's sword would not be able to pierce the mystic gold silk armor, the energy possessed by the flying sword would still penetrate through it and destroy the body beneath. If the other party was a Foundation establishment cultivator and attacked with spirit techniques, the mystic gold silk armor would be of no use at all. The disheveled old man continued, furthermore, even though the mystic gold silk armor is destroyed, it still retains its old weight of 5 tons. Which cultivator would be able to endure that? That is the reason why no one has touched it for the past 1,000 years. It's almost a useless spirit weapon. 5 tons. Even back then, there were not many golden cores who had the ability and qualifications to wear it. As though the disheveled old man recalled something, his expression looked somewhat wistful. Su Zimo naturally knew of how heavy the mystic gold silk armor was. If he hadn't activated his power of blood, he would not have been able to lift that seemingly thin inner armor. Suddenly, a thought struck him as he asked, since this mystic gold silk armor is here, does that mean that someone from our sect once wore it? The disheveled old man remained silent. Who is that person? Is he still in the sect? Su Zimo asked out of curiosity. The disheveled old man's eyes fluttered. After a long time, he sighed and shook his head. He is no longer in our sect and neither have I seen him before. I've merely heard rumors about it. It was said that he was a powerful being of our sect 1,000 years ago. In the northern region of Tianhuang mainland, he was invincible amongst the Foundation establishment and golden cores. There was no one who could challenge him. Su Zimo was shocked. Someone who was invincible through an entire realm? How terrifying was that? What happened after? Su Zimo asked right away. I'm not sure. However, rumors about him disappeared thereafter. Did he die? Su Zimo frowned and thought to himself, no, someone that strong isn't going to die that easily. But why is that person no longer in the sect, and it seems as though the disheveled old man is unwilling to talk about him? Did he commit some sort of violation? After a momentary silence, the disheveled old man continued, ever since our sect set up the 8 distresses formation, there have only been 2 people to go through it entirely. One is you, and the other is him. Su Zimo's mouth opened slightly. The disheveled old man waved it off, seeming vexed. Return the mystic gold silk armor and choose another item. You can't use that anyways. Given Su Zimo's current situation, the mystic gold silk armor was not suitable for him. However, for some reason, Su Zimo felt that he might be able to make use of it in the future. After a moment of hesitation, Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Thank you, Master, but I'm still decided on the mystic gold silk armor." Frowning, the disheveled old man did not say anything more and merely sighed. "It's up to you. However, do be careful during the fight against Feng Haoyu. If you think that you can't win him, just admit defeat and don't be reckless." Su Zimo could tell of the disheveled old man's concern and replied with a smile. "By the way, Master, I've got a question regarding weapon refinement." Su Zimo changed the topic and asked, "To be honest, Master, I've already successfully refined inferior-grade spirit weapons before the face-off. However, for some unknown reason, I just couldn't gather the second spirit pattern no matter what. Do you have any idea why?" Haha. The disheveled old man could not help but laugh. "Lad, you sure hid yourself well. So, you've already refined an inferior-grade spirit weapon. Not bad, not bad." Automatically, the disheveled old man thought that Su Zimo had merely refined a single inferior-grade spirit weapon. After laughing, he said, "Actually, the most difficult step of weapon refinement is spirit gathering. However, the most crucial step is in fact tempering. That is a step that requires a lot of technique. In the cultivation world, sects that specialize in weapon refinement all have their unique tempering techniques. There are many impurities in spirit components, and making use of spirit fire alone is not enough to purge them all. Some of the remnant impurities can only be purged through advanced tempering techniques. If your tempering skill is weak and there are too many impurities, the forged spirit weapon would not be able to endure the immensity of a forcefully gathered second spirit pattern. That is why the spirit gathering will fail and the spirit weapon will explode." Suddenly, Su Zimo was enlightened. The reason why he couldn't gather his second spirit pattern wasn't because of his spirit gathering method or the quality of his spirit components, it was because his tempering skill was not good enough. The disheveled old man said, "Right now, our sect doesn't have any really good tempering techniques. But, don't worry about that. Leave it to me." "Yes." Su Zimo could clearly sense the disheveled old man's care and love for him, that couldn't be faked. After a deep bow, Su Zimo left on his flying sword. The disheveled old man frowned as he looked at Su Zimo's back view. Actually, he had already been looking for advanced tempering techniques outside from the moment Su Zimo cultivated his level 3 spirit fire because he wanted to help the latter raise his weapon refinement skills. However, most of the tempering techniques were secrets of the sects and it was difficult for outsiders to obtain them. Sigh, the pearl is covered in dust. It's a pity, the disheveled old man sighed silently. He pondered about how he should go about looking for a suitable tempering technique for Su Zimo after the 5 Peaks face-off was over. All of a sudden, the disheveled old man's expression changed as he recalled an almost neglected detail. The mystic gold silk armor had a weight of 5 tons. As a level 8 Chi refinement warrior, how did Su Zimo manage to stuff it inside his storage bag? The more the disheveled old man thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. After pacing back and forth for a long time, he decided to abandon the thought of asking Su Zimo about it. Looks like this disciple of mine isn't that simple either. Chapter 121, Foundation Establishment Elixir. Chapter 121, Foundation Establishment Elixir. After the weapon peak face-off, many disciples of the 5 Peaks were still talking about it. A number of Weapon Peak disciples were even prepared to celebrate, and it was extremely lively. Su Zimo did not participate and returned to his cave abode straight. Obtaining number 1 of Weapon Peak was entirely within his expectations. The only unexpected gain was the powerful mystic gold silk armor in his storage bag. By the time he returned to the cave abode, it was already past noon. I want to be in seclusion. Guard outside the entrance and not let anyone in. Su Zimo said to the spirit tiger before assuming a lotus position on the stone bed and retrieving spirit stones from his storage bag. Tomorrow was Talisman Peak's face-off and he had no intention of spectating. Instead, he wanted to focus on his cultivation and attain a breakthrough as quickly as possible. Level 9 Chi condensation was much tougher than Su Zimo had imagined. But of course, the biggest reason for that was because he had wasted too much time on Array Peak in the past 6 months. In the final 2 months, he had spent most of his time on practicing his sword-wielding skills and the sword formation. He did not have much time to actually raise his cultivation realm. There was a perfect grade spirit gathering elixir within his storage bag. He was almost done absorbing more than 2,000 inferior grade spirit stones. If he still could not achieve a breakthrough to level 9 Chi condensation, he would consume that spirit gathering elixir. The next morning, Shui and other Weapon Peak disciples arrived at Su Zimo's cave abode early in the morning to invite him along to spectate at Talisman Peak. Even though it was less than 5 days, the 5 Peaks face-off was the biggest event of the year in the sect. Almost none of the trial disciples would continue to cultivate immensely in these 5 days. Even if they did not know anything about talismans, it was interesting to join the crowd too. But of course, more importantly, the person known as the number 1 beauty of the 5 Peaks, Leng Ro, would be taking part in this year's Talisman Peak face-off. In fact, there was a high chance she could get number 1 of Talisman Peak. Many disciples wanted to go and catch a glimpse of the beauty's aura. However, Shui and the others were prevented from entering by the spirit tiger. They tried to explain things to the spirit tiger but to no avail, and finally, they could only leave. Before long, little Fatty arrived too. However, he had to leave as well against the snarling growls of the spirit tiger. Su Zimo was completely oblivious to everything happening outside. He was immersed in cultivation till the 3rd day of the 5 Peaks face-off. 3rd day, Elixir Peak face-off. This was Su Zimo's 2nd round of challenge against Feng Haoyu. Everyone knew that Feng Haoyu had lost the 1st round on Weapon Peak's face-off. Today's challenge would definitely be more intense than ever. Su Zimo pushed his door open and walked out of his cave abode. Even after a day and night with the spirit stones in his storage bag emptied out, he was still at the peak of level 8 Chi condensation. Su Zimo was in no hurry. He still had time. After the Elixir Peak face-off, he would continue to cultivate and attempt for a breakthrough by consuming the spirit gathering elixir. Early in the morning, many disciples had gathered on Elixir Peak. An endless stream of disciples arrived continuously in midair, their clothes fluttering gracefully in the skies. The moment Su Zimo arrived on Elixir Peak, he was held back by little Fatty. "Bro, why didn't you come yesterday? Who won 1st place?" Su Zimo avoided answering by asking another question. "Of course it's Sister Leng Ro." Little Fatty snickered. "That Li Liang from Talisman Peak is no match for Sister Leng Ro." He was completely crushed. It was so exciting. "Bro, you didn't get to witness Sister Leng Ro creating talismans. That's what I call beautiful." "What nonsense is that?" Just then, a fair hand appeared behind little Fatty's head and rapped on it lightly. Although the person who spoke sounded cold, it didn't seem like there was any ill intentions. Su Zimo turned his glance and met with a pair of icy eyes. A ravishing girl emitted an aura that prevented people from approaching her. Standing behind little Fatty was Leng Ro, disciple of Spirit Peak. Unexpectedly, Leng Ro actually nodded when she met with Su Zimo's eyes. Slightly stunned, Su Zimo smiled and nodded in return. Even though the both of them joined the sect at the same time, this was the first time he was having such an interaction with her. Only, Su Zimo was slightly surprised. Given Leng Rou's personality, she would usually ignore even if people greeted her. Now, even though she did not say anything, her action was still rather surprising. Actually, after Su Zimo won first place in the Weapon Peak face-off, a number of disciples from the 5 peaks already had a changed impression of him. Or rather, they wanted to befriend him. No cultivator would not want to be friends with a weapon refinement master. Everyone witnessed Little Fatty obtaining an inferior grade spirit weapon previously. Even though they said nothing, all of them were extremely envious. Come, let me introduce you. Little Fatty's beady eyes revolved around Su Zimo and Leng Rou as he giggled. This is number 1 of Talisman Peak, Sister Leng Rou. This is my bro, number 1 of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo. Su Zimo and Leng Rou exchanged glances. Leng Rou avoided his gaze and Su Zimo merely smiled with an indifferent expression. Blinking, Little Fatty continued, don't just stand there. Both of you have your own strengths and you should hang out more in the future. When he mentioned hang out, Little Fatty winked at Su Zimo and sounded odd. Su Zimo was alright about it. However, Leng Rou seemed to have thought of something as a blush appeared across her cheeks. Compared to her snow-white skin, it was extremely obvious. More nonsense. You're asking for a beating. Leng Rou chided lightly and knocked Little Fatty on the head. Little Fatty merely continued giggling. Right then, Su Zimo felt an intense enmity as he looked over instinctively. Not far away, Feng Haoyu arrived on his flying sword with a group of Spirit Peak disciples. Upon seeing that Su Zimo and Leng Rou were standing closely together, rage flashed through the eyes of many Spirit Peak disciples. Even though Feng Haoyu's expression was cold and aloof as usual, his hands behind his back were curled into fists. Bro, other than Feng Haoyu, there's an Elixir Peak disciple called Wuxia Yuan who is also a strong competitor for you in this face-off. You must not underestimate him. Little Fatty said, he was the number 1 of Elixir Peak last year. He's probably even stronger for this year's face-off. Su Zimo nodded. Compared to Weapon Peak, there were slightly more disciples taking part in the Elixir Peak face-off at around 200 odd. All of them gathered in the Elixir Refinement Hall and waited patiently. Refinement of elixirs was unlike that of weapons. During the Weapon Peak face-off, the disciples could choose the type of weapon they wanted to refine. However, for the Elixir Peak face-off, the Peak Master would decide on a specific elixir for the disciples to refine where they would be judged based on the final quality. Therefore, many disciples would always try to guess which elixir would be refined during the face-off. If they guessed it right and focused their practice on that specific elixir, their chances of winning the face-off would be much greater. Before long, the 5 Peak Masters arrived. When the time approached, the brown-haired youth stood up and declared, the elixir to be refined for this face-off is. At that, the brown-haired youth paused for a moment as all disciples within the hall listened intently with bated breath. The brown-haired youth then continued slowly, is, the Foundation Establishment Elixir. The moment he said that, the crowd fell into an uproar. The Foundation Establishment Elixir was one of the most difficult to refine among Grade 1 elixirs. In the past, there was an instance of the Foundation Establishment Elixir being tested during a face-off as well. However, all participating disciples at that time failed to refine the pill and as such, it turned out to be the dramatic outcome of having no number 1 for that face-off. After that, in order to prevent such a situation from happening again, there had been no more requests for Foundation Establishment elixirs. To think that this year's Elixir Peak face-off would ask for the Foundation Establishment elixir once more. Chapter 122, Perfect 5 Patterns. Chapter 122, Perfect 5 Patterns. Many disciples in the hall frowned upon hearing Foundation Establishment Elixir. Everyone had guessed wrongly. Within the 5 peaks, few disciples would attempt to refine the Foundation Establishment Elixir. It required more than 10 types of ingredients and the refinement process was overly complex. Usually, only intermediate elixir refinement masters would have more confidence to try it. Out of the 200-odd disciples, Su Zimo, Feng Haoyu and the previous year's number 1, Wuxia Yuan, were the only ones who were still calm. During that period of time, some cultivators had already started placing plates of spirit herbs at the front of the hall. The brown-haired youth said in a deep voice, "Everyone's only allowed to take a single set, nothing more." Only a single set of spirit herbs, that was another increase in difficulty. Since the Foundation Establishment Elixir required more than 10 types of spirit herbs, a mistake in extraction for any one of them would result in a wrong ratio for the recipe and a failure to refine the pills. "Peak Master, this is too difficult." "That's right. What if we were to make a mistake while extracting out of nervousness? Wouldn't that mean we won't have a chance anymore?" Many disciples could not help but start to grumble. The brown-haired youth replied coldly, "The ingredients required for the Foundation Establishment Elixir are still considered common and our sect has them planted all around. But, do you know that some elixirs require spirit herbs that are extremely rare? For those, you only get one shot. If you fail your refinement, you can't blame anyone else but your own lack of skills." Everyone was silent. Feng Haoyu laughed softly as he had already returned from choosing a stalk of each spirit herb, preparing himself for the Foundation Establishment Elixir. The second to do so was Wuxia Yuan. Right after, the disciples headed forth and chose their spirit herbs. Before long, many of them returned to their original positions and took out their elixir furnaces to make preparations. "Let the elixir peak face-off commence." The brown-haired youth waved his hand. Spirit fires lit up within the hall. Su Zimo had never refined a Foundation Establishment elixir yet. However, he was no stranger to the spirit herbs used. They were all ingredients used for other elixirs as well. He was in no hurry as he picked up a stalk of spirit herb before him and closed his eyes to recall. As he went through his memories, he recalled the temperature required for the spirit herb as well as every single detail of the extraction process. He only had a single chance. If he were to fail the extraction, he would fail the elixir peak face-off. He had no room for errors. "Ah!" Right then, a disciple beside him yelped as he watched a pile of ashes on his palm with a vexed expression. He had failed his first spirit herb's extraction. Because the temperature he used was too high, the spirit herb instantly turned into ashes. Sighing, that disciple put away his elixir furnace and left the hall. Right after, 2 other disciples failed their extractions and left silently. A few people had been eliminated just on the first spirit herb's extraction. In truth, it wasn't because those disciples were bad at elixir refinement. However, because there was only a single chance and this was during elixir peak's face-off, it was only natural for them to feel pressured and make mistakes. Before long, most of the disciples had completed the extraction of their first spirit herb as they placed the essence into the elixir furnace. They had naturally started their first extraction with a spirit herb they were most familiar with and hence the success. What's Su Zimo doing? Has he fallen asleep? I think he has no clue what he's doing and he's just pretending that he does. Upon seeing that Su Zimo had not started on his extraction for a long time, some sarcastic voices could be heard from the crowd. It was only until the other disciples had started on their second spirit herb's extraction that Su Zimo opened his eyes. Igniting his spirit fire, he placed the spirit herb above it and started extracting. Before long, his extraction produced a tuft of powder which he placed in the elixir furnace. Picking up his second stalk of spirit herb, he closed his eyes and recalled once more. After a long time, he opened his eyes again and began extracting his second stalk of spirit herb. More disciples were eliminated at the second spirit herb's extraction. Compared to Feng Haoyu and Wuxia Yuan, Su Zimo's speed was extremely slow. However, he made no mistakes at all as every single essence he produced gave off a refreshing medicinal scent. As time passed by, more and more disciples were eliminated. By the time Su Zimo was done with extraction of his spirit herbs, there were only around 80 of the 200-odd people left. Third step of elixir refinement, synthesis. The proportion of spirit herb essences required must be exact. The slightest mistake would result in a refinement failure. This step was a test of the elixir refinement master's attentiveness and conscientiousness. After synthesis came the secondary extraction. This time, the flame can be more intense. This was the step where Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu's level 3 spirit fire would be of great use. What was worth mentioning was that Wuxia Yuan had also managed to cultivate a level 2 spirit fire, which was extremely rare. Feng Haoyu was the first to be done with the fourth step, followed swiftly by Wuxia Yuan. Because he had spent too much time on the first extraction, Su Zimo was one of the slowest among the many disciples. Fifth step, formation. This step would reveal the quality of the elixir, and it would be obvious who was better. Initially, Feng Haoyu and Wuxia Yuan would take note of Su Zimo's progress and situation from time to time. However, neither of them dared to be distracted on the step of formation. It was absolutely silent outside of the hall as well. Everyone held their breaths and watched intently at the two people condensing their elixirs. Bang! There was a crisp sound. One of the disciples had failed his formation and the elixir exploded. Dejected, he left the elixir refinement hall in indignance. Right after, more crisp sounds echoed out of the hall. Bang! 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 Another couple of disciples failed their elixir formation and the number of people in the hall decreased. Form. One of the disciples cursed softly. Ha, I did it. That disciple burst out in laughter. Right as he was about to collect his elixir and check on its quality, black smoke puffed out of the holes in his elixir furnace, giving off a nasty stench. The brown-haired youth shook his head. For a black smoke as such to be released, it meant that the Foundation Establishment elixir was no different from a poisoned elixir. Form. Right then, Wuxia Yuan hollered softly. Immediately, a white smoke wafted out of the elixir furnace with a faint fragrance. Retrieve. A pill flew out of the elixir furnace and a clear pattern could be seen on it. It's an inferior grade Foundation Establishment elixir. Senior Brother Hua is amazing. He did it. Wuxia Yuan heaved out a sigh of relief and looked towards Feng Haoyu subconsciously. Form. Right then, Feng Haoyu was also done with his elixir formation as a stronger fragrance was emitted from his side. An elixir flew out and hovered in midair. Spinning around, there were two elixir patterns clearly etched on it. A middle-grade elixir. Wuxia Yuan's eyes dimmed as he let out a long sigh. He believed that he was definitely not weaker than Feng Haoyu in terms of the first three steps. However, for the fourth step, secondary extraction, his level 2 spirit fire was no match for a level 3 which was able to extract more thoroughly. That was the reason for the difference in quality of their pills. Before long, the other disciples were done with their elixir formation as well. Even though there were more than 20 others who had succeeded in elixir formation, their elixirs contained too many impurities and had no grade because of their poor qualities. Right then, Su Zimo was completed with his elixir formation as well as a thick aroma spread across the place. The moment the disciples outside the hall caught a whiff of it, their bodies shuddered and they let out intoxicated expressions as the spirit qi in their bodies began to rumble. If the fragrance alone possessed such an effect, what grade was the elixir created? The brown-haired youth's nose quivered as he sniffed carefully. Instantly, his expression changed as he bolted upright. With disbelief in his eyes, he murmured softly, "Could it be?" Swash! An elixir flew out of the elixir furnace and hovered in midair. There were 5 patterns etched on it. It was a perfect Foundation Establishment elixir. Chapter 123, Mysterious Danger. Chapter 123, Mysterious Danger. Looking at the Foundation Establishment elixir that hovered in midair, it was pure silence both in and outside the hall. Everyone held their breath subconsciously as their eyes and minds were drawn in by that single elixir. The 5 elixir patterns on the surface looked so profound and mystical. They were flawless, as though they were the most beautiful patterns in this world. 5 elixir patterns, a perfect Foundation Establishment elixir. Even advanced elixir refinement masters who could refine grade 3 elixirs would not dare to guarantee that they could definitely produce a perfect Foundation Establishment elixir. Perfection meant that there were no flaws at all. This proved that every step and every detail of an elixir refinement master during the entire pill refinement process had reached perfection. With such a foundation establishment elixir, even chi refinement warriors with a pseudo-spirit root would have a chance to rise to foundation establishment realm. At that moment, most of the disciples forgot about victory or defeat. They forgot that this was Elixir Peak's face-off as they were all smitten by the elixir. That was the case until Su Zimo put away the foundation establishment elixir. Thousands of disciples let out a long sigh at the loss of that spectacular sight. That sigh contained many complicated emotions. Disappointment, jealousy, envy, and respect. No doubt. He won without any doubt. I thought that Elixir Peak's face-off would be an even more intense challenge between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu. To think that it would be this one-sided. The 5 peak masters nodded in approval as their eyes could not conceal their admiration for Su Zimo. Elixir Peak's number 1. Number 1 of 2 peaks. More importantly, this year's number 1 of Elixir and Weapon Peak was much stronger than previous years. For so many years, there had never been a number 1 of the Weapon Peak face-off who could successfully produce an inferior-grade spirit weapon. For so many years, there had never been a number 1 of the Elixir Peak face-off who could create a perfect elixir even for elixirs with easier recipes. Compared to the other sects, Ethereal Peak was much weaker in terms of elixir and weapon refinement. In the immortal meet of the Great Zhou dynasty held once every 10 years, Ethereal sect has never had anyone leave their names on the rankings of elixir and weapon refinement for the sect competition. But this time, the 5 peak masters saw hope through Su Zimo. Perhaps, he might be able to leave his mark on the ranking list for elixir and weapon refinement during the sect competition. That would bring them immense prestige. Elixir Peak's Wuxia Yuan came before Su Zimo and laughed bitterly, cupping his fists. Junior brother Su, you're really amazing. I've truly lost against you. I was just lucky, Su Zimo smiled. At that moment, everyone's gazes landed on Su Zimo. A look of admiration flickered through Leng Rou's eyes as well. On the other side, Feng Haoyu was surprisingly calm despite his defeat as he lowered his head in deep thoughts. At the same time, Su Zimo felt a mysterious sense of danger. It was extremely faint, but when he sensed for it carefully, he could not discover anything. Su Zimo frowned. It was an ominous feeling. Ever since he entered the sect, he had been very comfortable. Even if Feng Haoyu was hostile to him, it did not bring him such a sense of danger. Discreetly, Su Zimo swept his gaze past the 5 peak masters and did not notice anything unusual. Therefore, he turned sideways and glanced at the crowd outside the hall, but to no avail. The sense of danger earlier on seemed to be a hallucination. Right then, the brown-haired youth declared, "The outcome of the Elixir Peak's face-off is clear. I believe everyone has seen it. The victor is Su Zimo, disciple of Weapon Peak." Outside the hall, Little Fatty, Shui Yi and other Weapon Peak disciples cheered loudly. Right then, every single Weapon Peak disciple beamed with pride. The disheveled old man sat where he was laughing non-stop as well. "Su Zimo, follow me to the elixir chamber to choose an elixir of your picking." Su Zimo nodded. Under the envious gaze of many disciples, he left the elixir refinement hall and headed to the elixir chamber with the brown-haired youth. Even though the disciples outside the hall gradually dispersed, they were still discussing the outcome. Losing 2 rounds in a row, Feng Haoyu left the elixir refinement hall expressionlessly. "Senior brother Feng, there's no need to take the outcome to heart. In any case, you can still teach that guy a lesson after the Spirit Peak face-off." A Spirit Peak disciple remarked consolingly. Feng Haoyu smiled calmly. Elixir and weapon refinement are merely supplementary skills at the end of the day. I hadn't spent much effort on them to begin with. If I lost, so be it. That doesn't matter to me. You're right, senior brother Feng. That's right. In the cultivation world, it doesn't matter how amazing you are at elixir and weapon refinement. If you meet with danger, you will still die all the same. Only true strength is what matters. Many Spirit Peak disciples responded in unison. After leaving Elixir Peak, Feng Haoyu suddenly said, "You guys can head back first. I'll spend some time alone." Thinking that it was because Feng Haoyu was in a bad mood, the many disciples did not say anything else and left one after another. Once everyone left, Feng Haoyu turned around slowly and glared towards the elixir chamber. His calm gaze suddenly changed, emitting a chilling aura. On the other side, there were still some disciples lingering on Elixir Peak discussing things. Feng Haoyu had lost completely for both challenges. That's right. He boasted that he wanted to get number 1 of 3 peaks before the 5 peaks face-off. Now, I guess only Spirit Peaks left for him. I heard that Su Zimo had not intended to take part in the Elixir Peak face-off to begin with. Feng Haoyu was the one who provoked him into doing so. A disciple at the side shook his head. In my opinion, this may not be a good thing for Su Zimo. What do you mean? Someone asked. That's right. He's number 1 for 2 peaks. The rewards aside, the honor itself is immense. Everyone will know of Su Zimo's name in the sect from now on. That person scoffed coldly. Don't forget, he still has a fight with Feng Haoyu after the 5 peaks face-off. Upon saying that, everyone suddenly realized. Feng Haoyu was at perfected chi condensation while Su Zimo was only at level 8, both of them were not on the same level. That person continued, Su Zimo's 2 consecutive victories must have already angered Feng Haoyu. In their final fight, Su Zimo is mostly going to be crippled or dead. As everyone was discussing, Su Zimo came forth from the elixir chamber. This time, he had chosen a perfect spirit gathering elixir. Coupled with the existing perfect spirit gathering elixir in his storage bag, he was confident that he would be able to reach level 9 chi condensation within the next 2 days. Just as Su Zimo was about to leave, the brown-haired youth held him back and asked, "How confident are you for your last fight against Feng Haoyu?" Not confident, Su Zimo shook his head. "I've got a suggestion," the brown-haired youth said. "Now that you're number 1 of 2 peaks, there's no need for you to fight against Feng Haoyu. Even if you admit defeat, it's nothing much. After all, there's no long-lasting hatred within the same sect." Su Zimo did not reply to the question and merely nodded. "Yes, I will consider it again." "All right, you can go back now," the brown-haired youth nodded. Chapter 124, Array Peak Face-Off. Chapter 124, Array Peak Face-Off. Su Zimo had not left far from Elixir Peak on his flying sword when he caught sight of a person who seemed to have been waiting for him for a long time. "Su Zimo, I didn't think much of you at first. But, I have to admit that the surprises you've given me weren't too small," Feng Haoyu said with a fake smile. Su Zimo paused for a moment and ignored him, wanting to leave on his flying sword. Feng Haoyu continued, "Oh yes, there's something I need to remind you about." "Oh?" Su Zimo remarked softly without turning back. "From now on, you'd better keep your distance from Leng Ro. Or else," even though Feng Haoyu did not continue, there was a chilling coldness in his tone. Suddenly, Su Zimo laughed. He and Leng Ro were merely acquaintances. However, Feng Haoyu's threatening tone disgusted him. Su Zimo asked indifferently, "Or else, what?" "Or else, you will die." Since there was no one else around them, Feng Haoyu had no qualms and did not conceal his killing intent. With his back facing Feng Haoyu, Su Zimo's gaze narrowed. He had indeed sensed Feng Haoyu's killing intent at that very instant. Su Zimo's expression remained unchanged as he laughed. "Ethereal Peak forbids internal killing of disciples. You are no exception to that rule, Feng Haoyu." "Fufu, it's fine." Feng Haoyu replied coolly, "As long as you're in the sect, I'll play with you till you die." Su Zimo turned around slowly and looked at Feng Haoyu silently. He said expressionlessly, "Do you believe that I'll kill you right now?" For some reason, Feng Haoyu felt a chill run down his spine as Su Zimo stared at him. That feeling was as though he was being targeted by a ferocious ancient demon beast that could tear him apart at any moment. Frowning, Feng Haoyu dispelled the weird sensation within him. After all, Su Zimo was only at level 8 Qi condensation and was no threat to him. When he saw that Feng Haoyu did not reply, Su Zimo turned around to leave, and before long, he disappeared from the former's vision. When Su Zimo returned to his cave abode, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes flickered as he pondered deeply. He gradually noticed that something was amiss. Previously, Feng Haoyu was indeed extremely hostile towards him. However, after the weapon and elixir peak face-offs, that hostility had gradually transformed into killing intent. Even though it seemed normal, there was something ridiculous about it. There was no deep hatred between fellow disciples. Even if there was competition, there was no need for Feng Haoyu to want to kill him. Earlier, Feng Haoyu asked him to keep his distance from Leng Ro. Right after that, he revealed his killing intent. Although it seemed logical, it felt like he was trying to hide something. If neither Leng Ro nor the two face-offs were the reason for Feng Haoyu to want to kill him, what was? Was Feng Haoyu hiding something? Or perhaps, was he worrying too much? Was Feng Haoyu merely a narrow-minded person who was blunt? Su Zimo shook his head. He had a feeling that Feng Haoyu was not that simple. After pondering for a while more without any clues, Su Zimo entered his cultivate and continued with his seclusion cultivation. The array peak face-off was tomorrow. The location of the face-off was at the 10 Formations Pagoda, where the challenge would be on who could clear the most levels the fastest. Su Zimo had no intention of taking part in it. First, he did not have much time and he had to focus on raising his cultivation. Second, even though clearing the 10 Formations Pagoda would not expend too much spirit qi, it would take a toll on his mental health and energy. It would take him more than 2 days to recover from it. He had to do his best to prepare for the battle against Feng Haoyu 2 days later. On the other side, Feng Haoyu had just returned to his cave abode when a hoarse voice suddenly sounded in his ears. It was hard to tell if it was a male or female. Feng Haoyu, you said too much to that lad. The voice sounded deep and sinister, making one's hair stand on end. Feng Haoyu spun around suddenly, but there was no trace of anyone. You don't have to doubt me. If I'm here to look for you, I naturally know of your identity. I'm just in time to remind you to be careful and not expose yourself. Also, don't forget about your mission. The voice sounded once more erratically. Feng Haoyu was finally relieved upon hearing that. Letting out a long breath of air, he laughed. You're worrying too much, Senior. I intentionally requested for him to keep his distance from Leng Ro. That Su Zimo must definitely think that she is the reason for my killing intent. Don't underestimate anyone. Understood, Feng Haoyu nodded his head obediently. That Su Zimo is a hidden danger. We cannot keep him alive. Feng Haoyu lowered his head and replied in a low voice, Don't worry, Senior. Leave it to me. Senior, may I know who you are in Ethereal Peak? After pausing for a moment, Feng Haoyu asked. That's not for you to know now. If need be, I will tell you. Yes. After a moment, that voice no longer sounded and Feng Haoyu knew that the other party had left. Arranging his attire, he looked around before entering his cave abode. 4th day, Array Peak Face-Off. Each year, there were not many disciples spectating Array Peak's face-off. After all, the challenge was to clear the 10 Formations Pagoda. Prior to this, there was already a record on the 10 Formations stele and everyone already knew who the number 1 would be. But it was different this year. Just 3 months ago, a mysterious challenger had appeared and destroyed every single record in the 10 Formations stele's history. Cleared level 10, 7 days 18 hours. That row of words was still at the first row of the 10 Formations stele. It was eye-catching, but its name was completely blank. Out of curiosity, everyone wanted to know the identity of that mysterious challenger. To many disciples, they felt that the reason why that person had kept his identity hidden was because he wanted to shock everyone during the Array Peak face-off. As such, Many trial disciples had already gathered on Array Peak early in the morning because they wanted to see his true identity. The 5 peak masters had arrived early on as well. Seated in a row, they conversed idly. "Xian Yi, you're still unwilling to tell us even now?" Wen Xian laughed and asked. The brown-haired youth urged as well, "That's right. Since we're going to find out today, we'll at least be prepared if you tell us beforehand." Xian Yi's gaze swept through the crowd, but he did not see Su Zimo. After pondering for a while, he shook his head. "Forget it, you guys can see for yourself." Since Su Zimo did not choose to announce it, Xian Yi had no intention to reveal it either. Zhongwen of Array Peak came before the 10 formations stele and looked at the first row of words with a complicated expression. "Are you finally going to show yourself today?" He murmured softly, "Let me see who you are so that I can accept my defeat thoroughly." Before long, the Array Peak face-off began. Doves of disciples challenging the 10 formations pagoda entered it together. Everyone outside was waiting for that one person to walk to the 10 formations stele and tap his sect badge. As long as that person appeared, there would be no need to take part in the Array Peak face-off, and he would also be the true number 1 of Array Peak. At that moment, Su Zimo was in seclusion within his cave abode, attempting to reach level 9 chi condensation. Chapter 125, Number 1 of Spirit Peak. Chapter 125, Number 1 of Spirit Peak. Time passed by gradually, and in the blink of an eye, a day had passed. The lights of the 10 formations pagoda's formation patterns shone repeatedly through the day. The first row on the 10 formations stele still had a blank column where the name was supposed to be. By the time the last person was sent out of the 10 formations pagoda, there were still no changes on the 10 formations stele. Not to mention the many trial disciples gathered before Array Peak, even the 4 peak masters looked to be slightly disappointed. Just who is that person? Why is he not here? Could that person truly think nothing of fame at all? The disciples were at the peak of their curiosity towards the mysterious challenger, such that they were getting anxious about it. Xian Yi stood up and declared, "The face-off is over. The victor is Zhongwen, disciple of Array Peak." Sparse cheers rang out through the crowd. Everyone knew that the reason why Zhongwen could obtain the number 1 position was because the mysterious challenger had not appeared. At that moment, Zhongwen looked at the 10 formations stele and smiled bitterly too. His title as number 1 of Array Peak this year was probably the least convincing. The 5 peak masters were the first to leave. In midair, Wen Xian was still disgruntled and asked, "Xian Yi, stop leaving us hanging." "Just who is it?" Xian Yi smiled and did not reply. After pondering for a while, he asked, after the 5 peaks face-off, "Where are you guys intending to set the location for the fight between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu?" "The location doesn't matter since the outcome will not change," Wen Xian replied indifferently. Xian Yi shook his head. "This match is the focus of everyone's attention. In fact, the hype might not even be less than the 5 peaks face-off itself. We had better take it more seriously. Su Zimo is forbidden from entering Spirit Peak, so we can't use the Spirit Arena there. Since Su Zimo is a disciple of Weapon Peak, it wouldn't be appropriate to hold it there either. That leaves us with the Spirit Arenas of Talisman, Array, and Elixir Peak," the brown-haired youth said. Xian Yi suddenly said, "Let's hold it at Array Peak then." "All right," Wen Xian nodded. The other peak masters did not have any objections, and so the matter was settled. Each year, Spirit Peak's face-off was always placed on the last day. It was also the most valued event of the sect and all the cultivators. Be it array formations, talismans, weapons, or elixir refinement, their ultimate goal was to raise the fighting strength of a cultivator. The cultivation world was a place where it was survival of the fittest and the strongest reigned supreme. The degree of cruelty was even more brutal than the jungle mountains where fierce beasts were rampant. This was also the reason why Dayu had Su Zimo survive in Songlang mountain range for a year. Now, Su Zimo had barely just stepped foot into the cultivation world and had yet to truly explore it and experience the threats within. Fifth day, Spirit Peak Face-Off. Almost all disciples of the 5 peaks were present. Many inner sect disciples who were in seclusion and even some elders turned up as well. The rules of the face-off were simple. Sect disciples would head up to draw lots for one-on-one fights. Finally, the eventual winner of the brackets is the number 1 of Spirit Peak. Even though Feng Haoyu had lost consecutively in the weapon and elixir peak face-offs, he was still the one who received the most cheers during the Spirit Peak face-off. At the same time, all 5 peak masters thought the most highly of him too. In the process of competing with his opponents, Feng Haoyu had indeed displayed the strength expected of him. He won consecutively from the start to the end and no one posed much of a challenge to him. Many disciples had heard that he was already cultivating one of the 3 major secret skills of the sect, Ethereal Sword, and wanted to catch a glimpse of its glory during Spirit Peak's face-off. However, Feng Haoyu did not use it at all. Other than Feng Haoyu, Ling Ro's performance was rather shocking too. Even though she did not possess an inferior-grade spirit weapon, she had a firm foundation in sword-wielding. Coupled with her talisman usage, she defeated many strong opponents of Spirit Peak. Ling Ro's flying sword carried a chilling aura. If one was careless and made contact with the sword, they would be covered in a layer of frost, reducing their mobility. Of course, little Fatty was still the one who surprised everyone the most. He was only at level 9 chi condensation and did not have much of an advantage in sword kinesis. However, with the help of the inferior-grade gigantic axe given to him by Su Zimo and his powerful body-tempering technique, he had managed to close the gap and obtain victory against quite a number of perfected chi refinement warriors. The final battle was still between Feng Haoyu and Ling Ro. Even though Ling Ro deployed a myriad of different talismans, Feng Haoyu was still stronger in terms of sword kinesis. With the aid of his wind spirit chi, Feng Haoyu's flying sword was more agile and graceful than anyone else. It was quite an eye-opener. Before sunset, Spirit Peak's face-off was over. As expected, Feng Haoyu was number 1 of Spirit Peak. Ling Ro was number 2. Little Fatty actually obtained 3rd place. The prize for the number 1 of Spirit Peak was also the most generous. Not only was Feng Haoyu awarded with many spirit stones and contribution points, he could also choose an elixir from the elixir chamber, an inferior grade spirit weapon from the spirit weapon chamber and a grade 1 talisman from the talisman chamber. Hee, seems like someone will be crushed by senior brother Feng tomorrow. That's right. Even people like Ling Ro and senior brother Li who are at perfected chi condensation lost to senior brother Feng. There's no way Su Zimo is a match with his level 8 chi condensation. After the Spirit Peak face-off, no one had confidence in Su Zimo. That Feng Haoyu had managed to obtain the number 1 of Spirit Peak with much ease. He did not even use his full strength, the brown-haired youth chuckled. Wen Xian could not contain his smugness as he nodded. I'm never wrong in my judgment. If that wasn't the case, I wouldn't have pleaded with the sect master personally to let him learn our sect's secret skill in advance. To be fair, someone like Feng Haoyu with a wind spirit root is truly the best candidate to cultivate ethereal sword, the cold-faced lady nodded. Wen Xian laughed. Before this battle, I already told Haoyu that if he were to win his fellow seniors and juniors using the secret skill, he would have lost even if he got number 1 since no one would be convinced of his victory. Not bad, Haoyu had not let me down. The disheveled old man remained silent and looked slightly worried. The stronger Feng Haoyu was, the worse Su Zimo was going to be defeated tomorrow. As his beloved disciple, he could not bear to see Su Zimo suffer such a blow. Wen Xian, give me some face. Why don't you tell Feng Haoyu to forget about the battle tomorrow? The disheveled old man suddenly said after much hesitation. Given his status, the fact that he was saying something like that to plead for mercy for a disciple was extremely rare. Xian Yi, the brown-haired youth and cold-faced lady remained silent. It was inappropriate for them to interfere in something like this. When Xian remained silent for a moment before replying, the arrow is already on the bow and has to be shot. I can't do anything about this matter. But... Right as the disheveled old man was about to continue, when Xian frowned and cut him off. Su Zimo won Haoyu twice in a row, but Haoyu's not even allowed to win one? Your disciple is dear to you, but mine isn't dear to me? With that, Wen Xian turned to leave and left the four of them alone. Slightly awkward, the disheveled old man sighed. The brown-haired youth coughed gently. Don't blame him. Wen Xian had poured too much effort into Feng Haoyu. Even though he did not say anything, he's definitely feeling upset about Feng Haoyu's 2 consecutive losses. It's only normal. Xian Yi patted the disheveled old man's shoulder and comforted him. It's all right. It's good to let Su Zimo suffer some setbacks too. His future achievements might not be any weaker than Feng Haoyu's. The road ahead is still long. Xian Yi's eyes flickered mysteriously as he said that. Chapter 126, 3 Flying Swords. Chapter 126, 3 Flying Swords. For the past 2 days, Su Zimo had not appeared at all. He was in seclusion attempting to reach level 9 Qi condensation. On the night after Spirit Peak's face-off, Su Zimo consumed the second spirit-gathering elixir. His body seemed to have transformed into a whirlpool as a steady stream of spirit qi flowed through his right hand into his body, wildly surging towards his dantian. The spirit qi within Su Zimo's dantian expanded rapidly, vast as the seas. After a long time, his body shuddered as his eyes jerked wide open. In the darkness, 2 rays of divine light shone and rapidly disappeared. Level 9 Qi condensation. In less than a year after he joined the sect, Su Zimo had finally reached level 9 Qi condensation. His cultivation speed was definitely not slow even in the entire cultivation world. At the moment, Su Zimo carefully sensed the changes in his dantian with confused eyes. Based on the Qi condensation manual, the spirit Qi within one's dantian would experience a change upon reaching perfected Qi condensation. In other words, the dantian would form a vast sea of Qi. That was also the reason why it would take more time, resources and difficulty to attain a breakthrough from level 9 to perfected Qi condensation. But right now, Su Zimo's dantian had already formed a vast sea of Qi despite having just attained level 9 Qi condensation. This was completely different from what the Qi condensation manual had described. This also meant that in terms of spirit Qi, Su Zimo's level 9 Qi condensation might not be weaker than Feng Haoyu's perfected Qi condensation. Su Zimo smiled to himself. Suddenly, he was filled with anticipation and confidence towards tomorrow's battle. The next morning, when Su Zimo walked out of his cave abode, there were already many cultivators waiting for him to come out of seclusion. Little Fatty, Shui Yi, and many other Weapon Peak disciples awaited him. Bro, you're finally out of seclusion. You're already at level 9 Qi condensation? Little Fatty's eyes lit up. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. Was Feng Haoyu the number 1 of Spirit Peak? Su Zimo asked. Everyone nodded. When they recalled Feng Haoyu's performance yesterday, everyone's expressions turned solemn. They looked at Su Zimo with a hint of worry in their eyes. To everyone, even at level 9 Qi condensation, the gap between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu was way too great. Little Fatty said in a low voice, Feng Haoyu obtained number 1 yesterday without even using the sect's secret skill. Clearly, he did not use his full strength. Bro, you've got to be careful today. Oh, so powerful? Su Zimo laughed. Shui Yi smiled as well. Junior brother Su, don't be too stressed in this battle. Just give it all you've got. If you lose, let it be. You're already the number 1 of 2 peaks anyways. That's right. Even if Feng Haoyu wins you, so what? Weapon Peak disciples are not good at fighting to begin with, so it's nothing embarrassing if he wins. Su Zimo smiled and asked, where's the venue of today's battle? Array Peak Spirit Arena. Little Fatty replied. Array Peak? Su Zimo muttered softly with a strange look flashing through his eyes. Ever since he left Array Peak 3 months ago, He had not returned. Sensing that Su Zimo's expression was odd, little fatty was worried and asked hurriedly, "What's wrong, bro? Is there anything wrong with Array Peak?" "Nothing's wrong." Su Zimo shook his head and did not explain. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go. Time to try out the skills of Spirit Peaks number 1. In just one day, Array Peak was once again filled with many disciples. Other than the trial disciples of the 5 peaks, some of the inner sect disciples also rushed over to watch the bustle. Chinyu of the disciplinary hall, who had a grudge against Su Zimo, was among them. The 5 peak masters were all present. Array Peak's spirit arena was right beside the 10 Formations pagoda and was close to the 10 Formations stele too. Feng Haoyu arrived bright and early. He stood on the spirit arena with hands behind his back, looking proud and haughty. Before long, Su Zimo and the others arrived on their flying swords and descended in front of the spirit arena. Su Zimo's appearance instantly attracted countless stares. "Fufu, I was wondering why he hasn't appeared for the past 2 days. So, he's been cultivating in seclusion and has actually reached level 9 chi condensation." The tone of the disciple who spoke did not sound surprised. Instead, it was filled with obvious mockery. So what if he's at level 9 chi condensation? He's still asking to be humiliated. I'm betting that Su Zimo's going to lose within 3 moves. Forget it. If senior brother Feng goes all out, Su Zimo won't be able to withstand even a single move. There was a flurry of discussion in the crowd. Even though Su Zimo attained number 1 of weapon and elixir peak, it did not mean that he was strong. No one thought highly of him for this battle. Many of the Spirit Peak disciples were just waiting to see Su Zimo make a fool of himself. Under countless scrutinizing gazes, Su Zimo entered the spirit arena. Right from the beginning, Su Zimo's expression was extremely calm. His eyes were peaceful and clear as if they were unmoved entirely. "Hey, Su Zimo. If you kneel and beg for mercy now, senior brother Feng might let you off out of kindness." Among the crowd, Sun Tao shouted and caused a burst of laughter. He was the Spirit Peak disciple who was knocked out by Su Zimo with a single slap. Su Zimo cast a sideways glance at Sun Tao indifferently and said, "Why? Do you think you haven't embarrassed yourself enough last time?" That incident had always been a disgrace for Sun Tao. Now that Su Zimo was mentioning it in front of everyone, Sun Tao's face turned green and red. He gritted his teeth and spoke coldly, "Su Zimo. I haven't settled things with you for what happened back then. You ambushed me first, but yet you dare to shamelessly flaunt it here?" "Flaunt?" Su Zimo laughed and shook his head. "What's there to flaunt about beating someone like you?" Anyone could tell of the casual and contemptuous tone in Su Zimo's voice. Instantly, Sun Tao's eyes were bloodshot as he hollered, "Su Zimo, fight me fair and square if you've got the guts. I'll let you witness what I can do." Right then, little fatty sneered, "You want to fight? Sure, I'll fight you." Sun Tao immediately wilted. During the Spirit Peak face-off, little fatty's strength was obvious to all. Sun Tao was no match for him. "Alright, that's enough. Feng Haoyu, Su Zimo. You guys can begin." Right then, Wen Xian shouted softly and suppressed the crowd. In the spirit arena, Feng Haoyu looked at Su Zimo disdainfully and scoffed, "Su Zimo, junior brother's son is right. If you beg me now, I can consider sparing you. If we really fight, you can't blame me for not showing mercy since a sword has no eyes." When he heard that, the disheveled old man frowned and could not help but declare, "When fellow disciples spar, one must not go overboard and threaten the other party's life." Feng Haoyu laughed. "Don't worry, Peak Master. I'm just going to teach junior brother Su a proper lesson about what it means to be a cultivator." Right as he said that, Feng Haoyu slapped his storage bag gently and summoned an inferior-grade flying sword. Without revealing how he controlled it, the flying sword revolved around his body and danced in the air, revealing an extremely precise mastery of sword kinesis. At the same time, Su Zimo summoned a flying sword from his storage bag. Everyone focused their attention. It was an inferior-grade flying sword as well. He must have gotten that as a reward from being Weapon Peak's number 1. Yes, the number 1 can pick an inferior-grade spirit weapon of his choosing in the spirit weapon chamber. This must have been his choice. Junior brother Su is not behaving rationally. If I were him, I would have definitely chosen a defensive spirit weapon. Pointing at Su Zimo's flying sword, Feng Haoyu chuckled. Do you really think you're qualified to fight me just because you have a single inferior-grade flying sword? You're mistaken. Su Zimo replied indifferently, it's not just one. Right as he said that, 2 more flying swords appeared in Su Zimo's palm. Chapter 127, Fight. Chapter 127, Fight. The crowd fell into an uproar upon seeing the 3 flying swords in Su Zimo's palm. If those were ordinary flying swords, they would not have caused such a scene. However, those were 3 inferior-grade flying swords. Even if Su Zimo was rewarded with an inferior-grade spirit weapon for being number 1 of Weapon Peak, what was up with the other 2 flying swords? Even for Spirit Peak disciples who were well known for their combat strength, most of them did not have inferior-grade spirit weapons. Su Zimo had just joined the sect for less than a year, but he had 3. The many trial disciples below instantly turned green with envy. The Peak Master is way too biased. Why did he give Su Zimo 3 inferior-grade spirit weapons? It might be because Su Zimo was number 1 for 2 peaks this year. So what if he's number 1 of 2 peaks? Our sect doesn't have such a rule. That's right. Can't they give us one instead? I've joined the sect for 2 years now, but I haven't even gotten a single inferior-grade spirit weapon. The disciples were not the only ones, even the 5 peak masters were stunned for a moment. Xian Yi's heart skipped a beat as a strange glint flashed in his eyes. He thought to himself, could that lad have already mastered the tripartite sword formation? He thought again, but it's impossible. How could he possibly have done so in such a short period of time? When he heard the discussions below, Wen Xian frowned and looked sideways to the disheveled old man. Sensing Wen Xian's gaze, the disheveled old man harumphed lightly, don't tell me you also think that I gave Su Zimo those 3 flying swords? The brown-haired youth suddenly said, the 3 flying swords are almost identical in terms of shape and size. They should have been made by the same weapon refinement master. We shouldn't have 3 almost identical flying swords in the spirit weapon chamber. In other words, does that mean Su Zimo refined those 3 flying swords himself? The cold lady raised her eyebrows in surprise. Xian Yi nodded. That should be the case. Using the vision of a golden core, they could naturally discern with a closer look that Su Zimo's 3 flying swords were almost identical and couldn't have been from the spirit weapon chamber. The brown-haired youth smiled. No wonder he was refining an inferior-grade gigantic axe for that little fatty of Spirit Peak during the Weapon Peak face-off. It was because he already had 3 flying swords. I've got to acknowledge that he does have an extraordinary attainment in weapon refinement. To think that he could manage to refine 3 inferior-grade spirit weapons in less than a year. Seems like that unique spirit-gathering method of his is rather useful. On the spirit arena. When he saw Su Zimo's 3 flying swords, Feng Haoyu was stunned for a moment as well. However, the surprise in his eyes disappeared as quickly as it appeared. He then laughed mockingly. Su Zimo, my dear Su Zimo. Do you really think you can win me just because you've got 3 flying swords? You can try me. Su Zimo replied nonchalantly. Swash. 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 3 flying swords floated before Su Zimo, trembling slightly as they hummed incessantly. Well played. Feng Haoyu's eyes lit up as he hollered softly, I'll show you what true strength is today. Go. Standing motionlessly on the spot, Feng Haoyu waved and injected a stream of spirit qi into his flying sword. The spirit pattern on his sword shone brightly. Swoosh. Turning into a stream of light, it burst toward Su Zimo's head with lightning speed. Before the sword even arrived, its cold aura was already striking. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. In a sense, this match was his first battle making use of immortal techniques after he stepped foot into the cultivation world. Feng Haoyu's sword was much faster and unpredictable than he had expected. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he split two flying swords to receive the incoming sword. His third flying sword was then sent to attack Feng Haoyu. Feng Haoyu narrowed his gaze. He had not expected that Su Zimo would try to retaliate instead of using everything as defense. You must be courting death. Pointing his fingertips into the distance, he commanded, "Go." The flying sword, which was initially speeding through the air, shone brightly and accelerated. It broke through the defense of Su Zimo's two flying swords before arriving right in front of him in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo's defending flying swords became nothing but a decoration. Well played. Many disciples below could not help but exclaim upon seeing that. If it was any other chi refinement warrior, they would have been petrified at the sight of a chilling, bedazzling flying sword appearing right before their faces. However, Su Zimo was not flustered in the slightest bit. Shifting his feet lightly, he sidestepped Feng Haoyu's attack barely. Even though the flying sword brushed by Su Zimo, it did not injure him in the slightest bit. When the 5 peak masters saw that, their eyes lit up as they nodded approvingly. Feng Haoyu had not expected that Su Zimo would be able to dodge that attack. At the same time, Su Zimo's third flying sword was already approaching Feng Haoyu. Feng Haoyu controlled his flying sword while summoning a silver shield from his storage bag. Injecting spirit chi, it expanded and blocked right in front of him. Clang! The flying sword met with the shield and let out an ear-piercing sound. That shield was the reward Feng Haoyu chose from the spirit weapon chamber after getting number 1 of Spirit Peak. Su Zimo's other 2 flying swords revolved around Feng Haoyu's flying sword. They clashed continuously, sending off a ferocious sword intent, and sparks flew everywhere. In an instant, Feng Haoyu's flying sword was restrained by Su Zimo's 2 flying swords and could not break through their offenses. On the other hand, Su Zimo's third flying sword was attacking Feng Haoyu constantly. Feng Haoyu could only defend passively. All the disciples watching were dumbfounded at what was happening as they looked on with disbelief. The battle was completely different from what they had imagined. In their opinion, the difference in strength between the both of them were so great that it would take 3 rounds at most to determine the victor. But, now that they were actually fighting, Feng Haoyu was on the losing end and could only defend passively. Su Zimo, who had 3 inferior-grade flying swords and a proficient mastery of sword kinesis, had completely restricted Feng Haoyu's movements. This doesn't make sense. Su Zimo's only at level 9 chi condensation. Even if he has 2 more flying swords, he shouldn't be able to take senior brother Feng head-on. Why does it feel as though they're both at a similar level of strength? The disciples below frowned in confusion. Little Fatty was the only one who had a rough idea of Su Zimo's background. Back when the both of them sparred in the cave abode, Su Zimo was able to match his level 8 chi condensation, only being a level 7. With that logic, Su Zimo should be able to hold his ground against Feng Haoyu despite being a level down. Upon seeing this, the 5 peak masters had different expressions. The disheveled old man was invigorated and pleasantly surprised. Spirit Peak's master, Wen Xian, was frowning. With his eyesight as a golden core, he could naturally tell that Su Zimo's mastery of sword kinesis was not weaker than most of Spirit Peak's disciples. Coupled with the assistance of 3 inferior-grade flying swords, his strength was raised as well. But of course, none of the 5 peak masters could understand how Su Zimo could stand his ground against Feng Haoyu's perfected chi condensation. The 3 flying swords clashed repeatedly around Su Zimo. Feng Haoyu's flying sword was clearly more agile and graceful. However, it could not reach Su Zimo after being restrained by the latter's 2 flying swords. On the contrary, Su Zimo's third flying sword was attacking Feng Haoyu consistently. Feng Haoyu could only rely on the inferior-grade shield to block and was unable to retaliate. Instead, he looked rather pathetic. The battle had fallen into a stalemate. Chapter 128, Thunderfall Talisman. Chapter 128, Thunderfall Talisman. It had to be said that Su Zimo had indeed shocked everyone. Based on the strength that he was displaying, he would have probably secured a top 3 position if he had taken part in Spirit Peak's face-off. If senior brother Feng were to use his full strength, Su Zimo would be defeated instantly. That's right. However, it's not embarrassing even if Su Zimo loses now, since he managed to corner senior brother Feng as such. The more the disciples below discussed, the more furious Feng Haoyu was in the spirit arena. This exchange was completely out of his expectations. Even though Su Zimo was only at level 9 Qi condensation, he was not getting the upper hand against their clashes. This meant that if Su Zimo was at perfected Qi condensation, the latter might very well surpass him in terms of strength. He must not let this carry on. Waving the shield in his hands, Feng Haoyu struck away the incoming flying sword. Suddenly, he pulled out a talisman from his storage bag and injected spirit qi to it. Whoosh! A bedazzling light appeared on the talisman. Senior brother Feng's making use of talismans now. That looks to be an offensive talisman that's rather powerful. Let's see how Su Zimo blocks this. Feng Haoyu threw the talisman in Su Zimo's direction. Suddenly, it exploded. The scattered talisman fragments stirred the spirit qi in the air, instantly forming a blinding flash of lightning. Thunderfall Talisman. The crowd exclaimed. Thunder types of attacks were the strongest and most ferocious amongst spirit arts. That talisman was naturally the most lethal among grade 1 talismans. That was also a reward that Feng Haoyu had obtained as the number 1 of Spirit Peak. Now that he had to use it, a pained look inevitably flashed by Feng Haoyu's expression. When he saw the Thunderfall Talisman summoned by Feng Haoyu, the disheveled old man's expression changed as he glared at Wen Xian. That disciple of yours has quite a lot of treasures. Talisman usage is also part of one's strength. It's normal, Wen Xian replied indifferently. He lost. Now that the Thunderfall Talisman's out, the outcome has been decided. Even if senior brother Feng was the one facing the Thunderfall Talisman, he would most likely have to use all his strength. Let's see how Su Zimo can even block this, Fufu. Right as the disciples were discussing, an explosion echoed out from the skies above the spirit arena. Snap! A bolt of thunder as thick as an arm struck down towards Su Zimo with a fast speed. The moment Feng Haoyu had summoned the talisman, Su Zimo had already felt that something was wrong and hurriedly withdrew his 3 flying swords. However, he was still extremely calm. At the same time as the talisman exploded, Su Zimo waved his hands and the 3 flying swords suddenly shuttled through the air, leaving tears in the void. Finally, they joined head to tail in a triangle sword formation. Buzz! A bedazzling light shone through the air below the spot where lightning was flashing. It was the light of formation patterns. A light of formation patterns had actually appeared in the skies above the spirit arena. This is... What's going on? Why is there an array formation? Did someone set up a formation beforehand? Something isn't right. That light of formation patterns seems to have been emanated from Su Zimo's 3 flying swords. The crowd let out a cry of surprise. They were baffled as to what was happening in the spirit arena. As for the 5 peak masters, they shuddered as their expressions changed drastically. Even if Xian Yi was mentally prepared, he could not help but feel excited upon seeing this scene with his own eyes. He exclaimed rapidly, "Good, good. Well done. Our sect finally has a successor for a sword formation master." The disheveled old man burst out into laughter as well. "Good for you, Xian Yi. So, you were secretly nurturing my disciple to be a sword formation master too. Not bad at all." As a golden core, the disheveled old man naturally knew that there was no way Su Zimo could become a sword formation master without Xian Yi's guidance. Wen Xian furrowed his brows in silence. Sword formation master? Most of the disciples below were unfamiliar with the term. Array Peak disciples were the only ones that were shocked and they heard the term. letting out astounded expressions. They could not help but gasp. Su Zimo's a sword formation master? So what if he's a sword formation master? What's the big deal? A Spirit Peak disciple sneered. Before he could finish his sentence, the thunderbolt from the skies collided with the triangle sword array and a loud explosion was heard as electricity shot out in all directions. Under the electric current in the atmosphere, Su Zimo's legs separated slightly. His expression was cold as he controlled the sword formation with both hands while his hair spread behind him like a furious mane. He was akin to an immovable god. Huh? He's actually fine? Many disciples were dumbfounded as their eyes nearly popped out. Su Zimo had managed to block the power of the Thunderfall Talisman completely with his triangle sword array and was completely undamaged. A disciple secretly exclaimed, "Is a sword formation master that powerful? What's a sword formation?" Someone could not help but ask. If I'm not wrong, that's our sex tripartite sword formation. Array Peaks Zhongwen said in a low voice. Why tripartite? Someone asked him. Zhongwen explained, the tripartite refers to heaven, earth and man. With the three swords joined head to tail as a foundation, they form the tripartite sword formation. The head is the tail and the tail is also the head. Every single corner of the sword formation has the sharpness of a sword and can both attack and defend. If one were to say that controlling three flying swords meant that Su Zimo's strength was increased. A sword formation made up of the three flying swords and made use of their combined strength was an exponential increase in strength. The tides had turned entirely. Everyone thought that Feng Haoyu would definitely win after summoning that Thunderfall Talisman. However, no one expected that Su Zimo would summon the tripartite sword formation to guard against the Thunderstrike entirely. As Leng Ro watched below, she could not help but lament internally, if I were to go against junior brother Su, I wouldn't be able to break that defense of his sword formation either. In the spirit arena. Feng Haoyu's eyes flashed with surprise when he saw that Su Zimo was able to withstand the Thunderfall Talisman. Right then, Su Zimo controlled the tripartite sword formation with both hands. Pointing forward, he commanded softly, "Go." A triangular sword formation that carried a chilling aura tore through the voids and sped towards Feng Haoyu with a blinding light. Instantly, Feng Haoyu retracted his flying sword and blocked himself from the tripartite sword formation. Clang! When the flying sword met with the sword formation, there was a clashing sound of metals. Feng Haoyu's flying sword was sent flying immediately. However, the tripartite sword formation merely paused momentarily in midair before clashing heavily against Feng Haoyu's silver shield. Bam! With a loud bang, Feng Haoyu's entire body was shaken as he stumbled a couple of steps back. He felt a sweetness in his throat as blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. He was injured. Even in Spirit Peak's face-off, Feng Haoyu was not injured once against the many strong competitors of Spirit Peak. Yet, against a Weapon Peak disciple that was a cultivation realm lower than his, Feng Haoyu was actually injured. Su Zimo's eyes gleamed brightly as he controlled the tripartite sword formation from afar. They hummed and quivered endlessly in the skies, sending forth a massive sword aura and could attack at any moment. It was only at that moment when the crowd realized that the outcome of this match was unpredictable. Su Zimo's strength was enough to pose a threat to Feng Haoyu. Everyone had underestimated the strength of this Weapon Peak disciple. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, Feng Haoyu laughed. It was a deep laughter filled with anger. Su Zimo, do you really think that you can win me with this lousy sword formation? Taking a deep breath of air, Feng Haoyu said word by word, "Today, I'll let you experience the sect's secret skill and let you understand my true strength." Chapter 129, Hexagonal Sword Formation. Chapter 129, Hexagonal Sword Formation. Even though Su Zimo was still calm upon hearing that, the many disciples below were shocked and excited. Senior brother Feng's finally about to use the sect's secret skill. I heard that it's one of the three major secret skills, Ethereal Sword. Through the ethereal planes, the sword is nowhere to be seen. Ethereal sword is one of the strongest sword kinesis skills within our great Zhou dynasty. Finally, we'll get to see it today. Most of the people present were trial disciples of the Five Peaks who usually would not have a chance to catch a glimpse of the sect's secret skills. Right now, their eyes were all widened in anticipation. The disheveled old man frowned. He looked at Wen Xian and said in a deep voice, "Let's stop the battle here and consider it as a draw between both parties." In all fairness, for Feng Haoyu to have to use the sect's secret skills against Su Zimo, he had already lost in the first place. That was because most normal trial disciples would not have the rights to learn ethereal sword. The disheveled old man's suggestion at this point was already a compromise on his end. Wen Xian pondered for a short moment before shaking his head. At this point, how can we appease the masses if a victor is not decided? Wen Xian, is it because you're indignant that Feng Haoyu was unable to win this? The disheveled old man was a little angry. Yes. Wen Xian turned to the disheveled old man and replied, "The three of you have been teaching Su Zimo how to refine elixirs, weapons and imparting sword formations to him. I can let that slide. However, Feng Haoyu is a disciple of Spirit Peak. I can't let him lose in a battle. That is a concern of my peak's glory." "You." The disheveled old man hesitated. Wen Xian waved it off. "I'm never wrong in my judgment of people. Haoyu is the future hope of our sect. At the end of the day, the legacy of our sect is not about elixir or weapon refinement. True strength is what matters." Right then in the spirit arena, Su Zimo said something that interrupted the argument between the disheveled old man and Wen Xian. "The sect's secret skill?" Su Zimo laughed and shook his head. "Feng Haoyu, if that's your last resort, you will definitely lose this fight." Everyone was stunned. No one could imagine that Su Zimo would say something like that in the face of the sect's secret skill. Was he looking down on the sect's secret skill or Feng Haoyu? What right did Su Zimo have? Ha ha ha. Feng Haoyu burst out in laughter. "Su Zimo, I think you don't know just how strong our sect's secret skill is to speak of that nonsense. Today, I'll teach you how to be a human. Go." Feng Haoyu conjured a sword art as his fingertip emitted a trace of spiritual energy and injected it into the flying sword. Quivering endlessly, the sword tore through the voids and a series of shadows appeared behind it in a bewitching manner. It was hard to tell between reality and illusion. When he saw that, Wen Xian nodded as his eyes flashed with admiration. The brown-haired youth commented with a grave look, "There are 3 levels to ethereal sword. To think that Feng Haoyu would have mastered level 1, shadows, this quickly. Haoyu has a wind spirit root to begin with and he's the most suited to cultivate ethereal sword. Otherwise, I wouldn't have let him learn the sect's secret skill while he's in Qi condensation realm," Wen Xian replied indifferently. In the spirit arena, Su Zimo retracted his 3 flying swords which hovered in front of him. Slapping his storage bag, another 3 flying swords appeared in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, all 3 of them were inferior grade spirit weapons as well. Everyone was stunned. 6 inferior grade flying swords. That was something completely unimaginable for Qi refinement warriors. What's going on? Holy fuck. How is Su Zimo taking out inferior grade spirit weapons 3 at a time? How is he obtaining them so cheaply? Most of the cultivators watched with widened eyes as their jaws nearly dropped to the ground. Many disciples were already envious over Su Zimo's previous summoning of 3 inferior grade flying swords. Now that he summoned yet another 3, most of them could not take it any longer. Some of the trial disciples who had joined the sect for many years instantly felt that they had been wasting their time since they hadn't acquired even a single inferior grade spirit weapon. Yet, Su Zimo had 6 after joining for less than a year. At that moment, most of the disciples finally realized as well. Those 6 identical flying swords could not have been from the sect's spirit weapon chamber. The only possibility was that Su Zimo had refined them himself. This is crazy. Had I known this would be the case, would have gotten closer to junior brother Su. Perhaps I might even get an inferior grade spirit weapon from him. Why would I need to learn sword kinesis if I had 6 inferior grade spirit weapons? I'll just toss them at any opponent I meet and smash them to death. Don't spout nonsense. Senior brother Feng is in possession of our sect's secret skill. That isn't something that can be defended against by spirit weapons. The crowd was buzzing, but the 5 peak masters remained silent. The disheveled old man furrowed his brows even tighter. Even though having 6 inferior grade spirit weapons was amazing, they were not match against the sect's secret skill. Sensing the disheveled old man's worries, the brown-haired youth comforted, no matter what, that lad is truly talented in weapon refinement still. As long as we nurture him well, he can still make waves through the sect competition. What the brown-haired youth meant was that even if Su Zimo lost this match, it would not affect his status in the sect. After all, everyone had their own specialties. Su Zimo was talented in weapon and elixir refinement while Feng Haoyu was good in fighting. The both of them had different advantages. However, no one realized that Xian Yi, who was standing beside the brown-haired youth, was incomparably nervous. He watched Su Zimo fixedly with a deep excitement in his eyes. Indeed, 6 flying swords alone won't be enough to defend against the sect's secret skill. But it was. In the spirit arena. Feng Haoyu's expression changed momentarily when he saw the 6 flying swords summoned by Su Zimo. However, that change disappeared almost instantly as he scoffed coldly, "Su Zimo, you're way too naive. You really think that you can defend against my sword just because you have 6 inferior grade flying swords? Go." A cold glint flashed in Feng Haoyu's eyes as he hollered. The sword tore through the voids with a chilling aura, letting out a soul-rattling explosion. A series of shadows formed behind the sword, confusing any onlookers. Su Zimo was calm as he waved his hands continuously, controlling the 6 flying swords in the air. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 6 flying swords intertwined, leaving streams of sword chi. The tripartite sword formation was a triangular sword formation. The hexagonal sword formation was an evolution of that. By combining 2 tripartite sword formations, it formed the hexagonal sword formation. It was a great enhancement, be it in terms of offense or defense. What is this? That hexagonal star formed by the sword formation looks familiar? I think that's the emblem on Peak Master Xian Yi's sleeves. Everyone instinctively looked towards Xian Yi. By now, Xian Yi had already stood up and was visibly emotional as he nodded. Good, good. Well done. You have actually managed to master the hexagonal sword formation. All other 4 peak masters let out looks of disbelief. There was only a single sword formation master within the sect, Xian Yi. As golden cores, they naturally knew how difficult it would be to become sword formation masters. The hexagonal emblem etched on Xian Yi's sleeves was a display of his pride. And now, the hexagonal sword formation has appeared once more. However, it came from the hands of a chi refinement warrior. That shocked everyone. Ethereal Peak, within Ethereal Palace. Sect Master Ling Yun's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly opened his eyes. A strange glint flashed in his eyes as he murmured, "The hexagonal sword formation?" Above the clouds in the skies of Array Peak, a gigantic pair of wings were faintly visible. A pair of eyes were also silently watching everything unfold in the spirit arena. Fufu, that lad. Not bad at all. Chapter 130, Defeat? Forced Foundation Establishment. Chapter 130, Defeat? Forced Foundation Establishment. The 6 flying swords formed the hexagonal star sword formation, and a bedazzling light of formation patterns blocked in front of Su Zimo. Feng Haoyu's attack was extremely swift as shadows were produced endlessly from his sword. It was difficult to distinguish where the sword was through vision anymore. However, the advantage of a sword formation was reflected at this moment as well. The sword formation formed by 6 flying swords was enough to block Su Zimo's body entirely. Feng Haoyu's attack that came right for him would definitely hit the sword formation. Clang. True enough. A crisp sound was produced when Feng Haoyu's flying sword struck the sword formation. Both sides exerted their strength. Break it. Feng Haoyu controlled the flying sword and injected spirit qi continuously. His eyes were wide with anger as his body trembled. He was using his full strength to break the hexagonal sword formation's defense. Behind the sword formation, Su Zimo was calm as usual. He pushed his hands forward and twisted them. The light of the formation pattern shone. Instantly, the hexagonal sword formation spun and sent Feng Haoyu's sword flying in the blink of an eye. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Feng Haoyu, have a taste of my sword formation's power too. Let's see if your secret skill can block this. Su Zimo stopped the hexagonal sword formation from spinning and pointed forth with his finger. In midair, the blinding light of the gigantic hexagonal sword formation tore through the voids and smashed towards Feng Haoyu. All disciples of the 5 peaks felt their hearts pounding as they watched with bated breath. Everyone realized that this may very well be the move that reveals the outcome of the fight. At that moment, the 5 peak masters were solemn as well. The hexagonal sword formation was considered as a grade 2 formation. Even with the sect's secret skill, Feng Haoyu was unable to face the might of the hexagonal sword formation head-on. From the point of view of the golden cores, Feng Haoyu had no chance of winning at all. If Feng Haoyu were to give up on defense at that moment and continue to control his flying sword to unleash the sect's secret skill to strike at Su Zimo, he might stand a shot at victory. However, that would require a kind of fearlessness to cast life and death aside. In a flash, Feng Haoyu's expression changed. Feng Haoyu subconsciously chose to defend himself against the terrifying might of the approaching hexagonal sword formation. Go! Conjuring the ethereal sword art, Feng Haoyu injected all the spirit qi he had into his flying sword to defend against the incoming hexagonal sword formation. When he saw that, Wen Xian sighed gently with a look of disappointment. He was defeated. If Feng Haoyu chose to fight head-on, this was a fight he was bound to lose. Bam! The flying sword smashed against the hexagonal sword formation and it exploded with a loud boom. Sparks flew as a surge of heat spread out. The sword formation trembled and almost dispersed. However, it soon stopped quivering and stabilized. As for Feng Haoyu's sword, it was repelled entirely. The hexagonal sword formation paused for a slight moment before continuing to crush forward. Ah! Gasps could be heard from the crowd as they saw this. Everyone realized that this elite who had won first place in yesterday's Spirit Peak face-off might very well be defeated. Right then, Feng Haoyu reached inside his storage bag and swallowed a qi rejuvenation elixir. Summoning his silver shield, he roared and pushed forward. Clang! 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 The hexagonal sword formation spun and struck at the silver shield repeatedly. With every single strike, Feng Haoyu would be knocked a step back and his face would turn frilier while his body trembled violently. Bang! The hexagonal sword formation was finally dispersed. At the same time, Feng Haoyu was also sent flying. He fell from the spirit arena and rolled a couple of times on the ground. Clothes filled with mud, he looked extremely wretched. Wen Xian closed his eyes. The disheveled old man heaved out a long sigh of relief. There was silence in the crowd. After a while, little Fatty waved his fists and let out a cheer. Shui Yi and the others looked excited and could not suppress their excitement. A Weapon Peak disciple had defeated the number 1 of Spirit Peak. This was something that had never happened in the thousands of years of history of the sect. Furthermore, it was a defeat with a level difference. Many Spirit Peak disciples were silent as they lowered their heads dejectedly. Looking at Feng Haoyu who was crawling up from the ground, their expressions were complex. It wasn't because the number 1 of Spirit Peak this year wasn't strong enough. On the contrary, the number 1 of Spirit Peak this year was much stronger than previous years because Feng Haoyu was already cultivating the sect's secret skill while being in Qi condensation realm. However, to their helplessness, Weapon Peak had produced an even more terrifying disciple. A genius in both elixir and weapon refinement, he even became a sword formation master and managed to release a grade 2 sword formation, taking down Feng Haoyu in a single move. It was said that Qi refinement warriors' fighting techniques were relatively simple. However, this fight was full of twists and turns with both parties revealing their trump cards. It was truly an eye-opener for many disciples. Su Zimo put away his flying swords and his expression showed a hint of exhaustion. Even though a sword formation was strong, controlling 6 flying swords at the same time drained a lot of spirit Qi. By now, the spirit Qi within his body had dried up. Fufufu. Right then, a sinister laugh sounded from beneath the spirit arena, attracting countless gazes. I haven't lost yet. Feng Haoyu slowly stood up with blood still oozing from the corner of his mouth. His expression was deranged and his eyes were filled with madness. Just as Su Zimo was about to leave the spirit arena, he heard that statement. He paused in his tracks and frowned, looking over. Feng Haoyu retrieved a jade bottle from his storage bag and poured out a pill. Rearing his head, he swallowed it before declaring coldly, Su Zimo, you will definitely lose today. What is that? I think it's a Foundation Establishment elixir. Senior brother Feng is trying to forcefully reach Foundation Establishment. When he saw that, the disheveled old man stood up and said grimly, Wen Xian, aren't you going to stop him? The 5 Peaks face-off is a spar between cultivators of the same realm. If Feng Haoyu were to reach a Foundation Establishment realm before fighting Su Zimo, what would that amount to? Wen Xian closed his eyes and struggled inwardly, looking hesitant. He knew that even if Feng Haoyu managed to defeat Su Zimo as a Foundation Establishment cultivator, it wouldn't be a glorious victory. However, Feng Haoyu might not ever recover from this blow of defeat if he lost this battle. This was someone that he had chosen and even regarded as the future of the sect. Wen Xian couldn't bear it. Xian Yi also persuaded, let the battle end here. This is against the rules. When he heard that, Wen Xian opened his eyes suddenly and yelled, what are rules? This is not a fight for the 5 Peaks face-off, it's a personal feud between the both of them. Even if Haoyu becomes a Foundation Establishment cultivator, that's his own strength. Also, Xian Yi. The hexagonal sword formation is a grade 2 formation. Who are you to talk about rules by imparting it to Su Zimo beforehand? Xian Yi frowned and shook his head. The reason why I imparted Su Zimo the hexagonal sword formation was because he had the right to learn. Actually, Xian Yi's statement had already vaguely revealed who the challenger who cleared the 10 formations pagoda was. However, in the heat of the moment, both Wen Xian and the disheveled old man did not think too much of it and naturally could not comprehend the hidden meaning behind Xian Yi's words. Wen Xian flicked his sleeves and said, if not for the hexagonal sword formation, Su Zimo would have been defeated by now. Since he was the one who broke the rules first, who's to stop Haoyu from fighting Su Zimo again after advancing to be a Foundation Establishment cultivator? Wen Xian, are you crazy? The disheveled old man could not help but scold, what's there to fight if Feng Haoyu advances to become a Foundation Establishment cultivator? Why don't you go and fight a nascent soul-perfected lord then? The disciples of the 5 Peaks below were dumbfounded. For the Peak Masters to argue over a fight between Qi refinement warriors, that was something that was even more exciting than the battle earlier. Alright, that's enough. All the disciples below are watching. Can you guys behave like the elders you are? The cold lady frowned and persuaded. Chapter 131, Not Even at Foundation Establishment. Chapter 131, Not Even at Foundation Establishment. Feng Haoyu was long already at perfected Qi condensation and could naturally advance to Foundation Establishment realm at any moment. However, he had not expected that he would make a breakthrough during his fight against Su Zimo. It seemed a little hasty. If it was anyone else, they might fail in their advancement to foundation establishment. However, Feng Haoyu was different. In terms of endowment or spirit root, he was the cream of the crop. Even though he was already injured, he had the confidence of reaching foundation establishment realm in one fell swoop after consuming the Qi rejuvenation and foundation establishment elixirs. As the 5 peak masters argued, the medicinal essence of the foundation establishment elixir coursed through Feng Haoyu's body and surged into his dantian. Inside, his sea of Qi rumbled and spewed continuously. Through the power of the medicinal essence coupled with Feng Haoyu's control, the vast sea of Qi began to coagulate to the middle. The sea of Qi was shrinking within his body. However, the aura it emitted was even more terrifying. The difference between Qi condensation and foundation establishment was a huge leap. In the path of cultivation, every crossing of a realm would bring about a significant change to one's strength. This was the reason why things like defeating an opponent of different levels was mostly only possible within the same realm. When the difference is a realm apart, it was difficult to take down an opponent. That was also the reason why cultivators would have a change in title after a breakthrough in realm. Cultivators at Qi Condensation Realm were called Qi Refinement Warriors. As for Foundation Establishment Cultivators, they were called Cultivator Warriors. At the Golden Core Realm, one could gain the title of a perfected being. From Qi Condensation to Foundation Establishment, the spirit Qi in the dantian would undergo a change in quality. Instead of Qi, it would be transformed to a liquid state. With that, the strength one possessed would be purer, more solidified and powerful. Using that as a basis, one could then learn and unleash the various types of power spirit arts in the cultivation world. Right now, that transformation was happening within Feng Haoyu's body. No matter how much the 5 peak masters argued, they were still rational towards this matter as none of them interrupted Feng Haoyu's breakthrough process. After all, Feng Haoyu's cultivation path may very well be crippled if he were to fail his foundation establishment breakthrough. That would imply the loss of a great genius. Standing in the spirit arena, Su Zimo did not make a move as well while he watched everything unfold. Everyone present was not fools. To be fair, if it was a life and death battle, Feng Haoyu would have already lost here. Which opponent would give their enemies a chance to break through? They would seize the opportunity and kill them on the spot. However, to everyone's bewilderment, Su Zimo was still extremely calm as though he was looking at something completely unrelated to him. An unknown period of time passed. The vast sea of Qi within Feng Haoyu's dantian disappeared, transforming into a drop of liquid. An even more terrifying aura spread out slowly, rippling through the crowd. From its size, that drop of spirit liquid was small. However, in terms of power, it was many times larger than the sea of Qi. Feng Haoyu let out a long sigh. By the time he walked back into the spirit arena, he had gone through a complete transformation. His aura was incomparably sharp with a torrential fighting spirit. Smiling, Feng Haoyu asked, Su Zimo, you don't have much spirit Qi left in you after controlling those 6 flying swords, right? Su Zimo did not reply and merely looked at Feng Haoyu silently. On the other side, Wen Xian and the disheveled old man were still arguing non-stop. The fight between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu had become a battle between the 2 peaks. To Wen Xian, it no longer mattered if the fight was unfair to Su Zimo. Feng Haoyu was a disciple of Spirit Peak and this year's number 1 to boot. He must not lose. What Wen Xian did not realize was that his attitude provoked the injustice in Su Zimo's heart. Since you want to let Feng Haoyu win, very well. I'll have him lose. Not just a loss. I'll have him suffer a complete defeat. Feng Haoyu waved his sleeves and his flying sword that had fallen nearby turned into a stream of light, returning to his side. The mere act of summoning his flying sword left many disciples' hearts palpitating. It was too fast. Now that he was a foundation establishment cultivator, Feng Haoyu's sword kinesis speed was more than twice as fast. Coupled with the support of his wind attribute alongside the sect's secret skill, Ethereal Sword, which Qi Refinement Warrior could defend against Feng Haoyu's next attack. Defending aside, they may not even be able to dodge it. The disheveled old man laughed coldly. No longer arguing with Wen Xian, he declared loudly, Su Zimo, let's not fight anymore. Since he wants the victory to be in Spirit Peak's name, so be it. It doesn't matter. Everyone knows who won or lost. With that, the disheveled old man left his seat and walked towards the spirit arena while remarking, what an eye-opener. A Foundation establishment cultivator actually has the cheek to fight against a Qi refinement warrior. Some people truly know no shame. Wen Xian's expression turned ugly. If Su Zimo had admitted defeat, he wouldn't have forced the fight to continue. When Feng Haoyu heard the disheveled old man's words, his cheeks burned with shame as well. Suddenly, Su Zimo laughed and asked, Master, it's already embarrassing enough for Foundation establishment cultivators to pick a fight against Qi refinement warriors. But, wouldn't it be even more embarrassing if they lose? The disheveled old man froze for a moment and paused in his tracks. He did not understand what Su Zimo meant. Su Zimo clenched his fists. His eyes shone brightly as he declared loud and clear, Feng Haoyu, let me tell you. Even at Foundation establishment, you can't beat me. Such arrogant words. Prepare to die. A trace of ruthlessness flashed through Feng Haoyu's eyes. Conjuring a sword art in both hands, he hollered as his flying sword suddenly burst forth, leaving shadows in its wake. The sword Qi was like ice that sent shivers down one's spine. Ah! A wave of shock and astonishment could be heard from the crowd. That strike was way too fast. Everyone had merely felt a flash before their eyes and the flying sword had already pierced right in front of Su Zimo. But the next moment, everyone's exclamation stopped. The disciples of the 5 Peaks discovered in shock that out of nowhere, Su Zimo had disappeared from where he was too. Bang! Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the spirit arena. A footprint appeared where Su Zimo was originally standing, shattering the surrounding stone slabs and leaving a spiderweb-like crack. Everyone focused their attention. In midair, a green shadow burst towards Feng Haoyu with lightning speed. A crisp sound rang out as the flying sword crossed with that shadow. If the sword had pierced Su Zimo, it would definitely flash with a bloody glow. However, there were no traces of blood on the spirit arena. He had dodged it. Su Zimo had actually managed to dodge an attack of a Foundation establishment cultivator using the sect's secret skill. But, what was that crisp sound earlier on? The disciples of the 5 Peaks below were unable to see clearly because the flying sword was too fast and Su Zimo's intercrossing with it merely lasted a split second. However, the 5 Peak masters saw everything clearly. The moment Feng Haoyu struck with his sword, Su Zimo left his original position and charged towards the incoming sword. Right as the sword was about to stab him, Su Zimo suddenly made an extremely strange dodge in midair and barely avoided the flying sword. It was a mere centimeter gap. As for the crisp sound, it was because the flying sword had struck Su Zimo's sect badge on his waist. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.